her the day she died. I was there. I cried at her grave. I saw them when they buried her.
Yes, you were. But what you and I are seeing now is not just a terrible dream. Our mother is a vampire.
Vampire?
In the daytime, she sleeps. In the nighttime, she wakes. To feed on human blood that she must have in order to sustain her life.
Is it the terrifying dungeon of doom? The dead return to life, living and lusting for bizarre pleasures. Fantastic fiends on a bloody rampage.
Nellie Louise Vaughn passed away at the age of 19, March 31st, 1889. She died of pneumonia. Now, of course, there's the Rhode Island vampire legend combined with the ghost legend. Some say Nellie resents her undeserved reputation as a vampire, so she's come back as a ghost to vindicate herself. Some say she's a vampire that is entombed in a crypt, aka Barnabas Collins, and she's waiting to be released. But some say she's a witch who appears on Halloween night, floating over her grave. Whatever the explanation, there was no connotation with any preternatural form involving Nellie Vaughn until nearly 80 years after her death. There's the story of a Coventry high school teacher who told his class that a vampire is buried off Route 102. Didn't specify the name, so a group of his students on Halloween night went searching for the 19-year-old vampire lady. They came to the West Greenwich Cemetery, found the grave of Nellie Vaughn, seemed to meet the age. However, it also had the inscription, "I am waiting and watching for you." Now, this connotation is not uncommon on gravestones from that era. Simply means someone who has passed away prematurely and is waiting and watching for family members and loved ones in heaven. But they took it to mean a vampire connotation. That's what the teacher had told them. They believed they'd found their girl. Hence, the reputation, Nellie Vaughn as a vampire. Nellie Vaughn as a witch. Nellie Vaughn is a ghost, vindicating her undeserved reputation. However, there are people who claim to have had sightings of the apparition of Nellie Vaughn in that cemetery. People claim, even recently, to have seen her floating around the cemetery grounds, following cars down Plain Meeting House Road, hovering off the ground, wearing a long Victorian dress. Even Charles Turek Robinson in New England Ghost Files has related a story where she appeared in modern dress, talking to a visitor of the cemetery. She explained that she was an historic enthusiast who was researching Nellie Vaughn. However, she became agitated and began saying, "Nellie Vaughn was never a vampire. Nellie Vaughn was never a vampire." And eventually the woman started exiting the cemetery. When she turned around, the woman she'd been talking to suddenly had vanished, no trace, and she couldn't have gotten out of the cemetery that fast. That's just one of the legends. Many still abound. People claim to see her to this day. And of course, there's a lot of vandalism resulting in that cemetery as a result of this. Whatever, there remains the mystery of Nellie Louise Vaughn. Connotated as a vampire, undeserved reputation. Up until the past 30 years, there was a gentleman who remembered Nellie Vaughn when he was a member of the church he attended. He himself said there was nothing to indicate there was anything unusual about Nellie Vaughn. Simply a lovely young woman who was a member of the local church in West Greenwich. Here we have the legend of Nellie Louise Vaughn. In July of 2011, we visited the West Greenwich Cemetery, West Greenwich, Rhode Island, located along Plain Meeting House Road, to visit the burial place of Nellie Louise Vaughn, alleged vampire and ghost. We are here at the West Greenwich Cemetery, Historical Cemetery number 2. Many legends are associated with this cemetery, including the legend of Nellie Vaughn, the witch, aka vampire, aka ghost, who is out to defend her soiled reputation. Also, the phantom dogs of Hell's Gate are known to walk around the perimeter of the cemetery, although they never actually enter it. So we're going to explore some of those legends today and see what we come up with. Now, some people have mistakenly assumed that Nellie Vaughn is actually buried here. She is not, but therein is the vampire connotation. People believe that she was entombed in here to keep her from getting out. And as you can see, people have been systematically chipping away at this, doing vandalism to try to get at the vampire enclosed within and let her out, or at least see her mortal or immortal remains. And it's unfortunate that there's been so much vandalism here because she isn't even buried here. Morning, Keith Johnson.
Keith, nice meeting you. My name is Bob Butler, and I'm a member of the Rhode Island Historic Cemeteries Commission, as well as with my wife here in town, the unofficial protectors of the cemeteries.
Oh, that's excellent. It's very nice to meet you.
Well, thank you.
What can you tell me about the history of this cemetery?
Well, this cemetery goes back to about, I think about 1894. Don't quote me on the date, but it's somewhere around there, and it was established by the Tillinghast. Actually, I don't have the name quite right, but regardless, there are a lot of Tillinghast that are buried in here. Pardon Tillinghast was the pastor of the Plain Meeting House, which was the American Baptist Church at the time. Actually, the church still uses it for 2 sessions a year. So it's still a Baptist church here in the town. And there are 90 different lots in here that have pretty much all been sold off at this point. And what happens is the cemetery passes from air to air to air, and is still controlled by a Tillinghast. So the Tillinghast have a great interest in the cemetery, and my wife and I and several other volunteers have been trying to take care of it.
Right.
It's strictly a volunteer effort. The town does support it because there are some lots under perpetual care, but there's very few. And since there are 90 individual different lots, the ones that are under perpetual care would never support the clearing that you see done here. We recently spent about 27 hours collectively getting it to the condition it's in. The Tillinghast are actually coming here for a meeting at the end of this week. So we wanted it to look nice for them. But beyond that, now that we've got it at a reasonable level of protection in terms of the ground being kept down and the stones are all visible, we want to try to keep it this way. So I will tell you that the town is supportive of the effort. They have very little money to put forth to this, and we understand that, so we don't look to get paid for it. But if we need a blade to be sharpened or something of that nature, then yeah, they're willing to do that.
Well, great. That's fantastic. Well, what can you tell me about the Nellie Vaughn legend itself and all the attention that has been foisted upon this cemetery because of her?
Well, all I can tell you, first of all, I suffered a tick-borne illness half a dozen years ago, and my memory is really very poor. So if I had my wife here, she could tell you the exact story, but I'm not going to attempt it. But what I will tell you is that with all the work we've done over the last 10 years, it's amazing the number of people that come not only here, but other cemeteries around the town looking for her, looking to, I don't know, put forth their idea of what happened and so forth. I myself don't really know the story, and when anybody comes to me looking for the story, I usually just send them away.
Right.
Because we're all about protection of graveyards and trying to honor and respect them, whereas a lot of people are looking to have a different bent on it.
Yes.
And one good example is the tomb that's out in the middle here. Actually had space for two bodies to be entombed there. When you look at the amount of work that somebody did to erect that thing, it would have been a whole lot easier just to put them in the ground and have a nice gravestone, but they didn't do that. Over the years, the kids have pried it open and taken the skull out and done other things that are just terrible.
Right.
So right now, this has been sealed up. The grounds themselves have been cut back. Next phase will be to try to re-erect some of these stones that have been toppled and repair some of the others that were broken. So I can't tell you anything about the actual Nellie Vaughn nursing ground
Right.
thing.
Connection
I don't,
there, the
I don't
supposed
really
connection.
remember the exact story, and since I'm absolutely in the other direction, we have actually mentored one of the students who was going in that direction, and I told her at the time, I said, I don't know if this is going to work. We're all about protection of graveyards
Right.
and respect for the cemetery. You're into the legends and so forth. So we'll tell you our part of it. If you want to explore the legend, that's your business. As far as I know, she did get her senior project done, but we try to put her on a different track and get her into a mode of trying to think about this as protection of somebody's ancestors and trying to make sure that we preserve the history that's written here. Because all of these graveyards here, particularly in this town, are the recorded history of the town. And that's important to us. I'm former Conservation Commission member, former Planning Board member, and Town Council member.
I see.
My wife and I have been here in town for 22 years, and we care very deeply about this town and trying to protect things. Also, having been a member of the Land Trust, who does control this property now, they were given the property and they fixed it up. They've taken care of the church. The church has never looked this good in 50 years.
It looks beautiful.
Done a great job under the auspices of Steve Wright, who's the chair. And we support his effort, and we try to work with them very closely. They take care of everything on this side of the wall. We're taking care of stuff on the other side.
Great. Yeah. I understand there was actually a grave violated in 1993 around Halloween, where somebody actually dug up a grave and took out one of the bodies and put a can of beer in one hand, a pack of cigarettes in the other, and I mean that's the epitome of desecration and disrespect,
well,
right
that
there.
probably would be the tomb, because that would be the only thing you could readily get at. Whether it actually happened that way or not, we lived here in town. I don't recall the story. That's pretty gruesome.
Yes,
sure
it
the police
is.
department would have some information on that if you wanted to go
Right.
and check with them. They'd be more than glad to share that. To tell you the truth, I don't think I've heard that story, or at least not that way.
Right.
And again, since I'm oriented total 180 degrees in the opposite direction. If I heard it, I wouldn't file it away for reference or anything like that. That's a pretty terrible thing. There are people like that out there. I mean, if you just look at the desecration done in this yard, it's very sad.
Yes.
But under Steve Wright's direction, they did apply for a grant from Champlin, and they did put all of these granite piers and the chain. The town actually replaced all the rough mud, which is what was here, clay-like materials in the yard. So the kids would come in and they'd do donuts and they'd dig it all up, and they just made a heck of a mess around the church. This has all been replaced by the town with rotten rock, with support from the Champlin Foundation. Steve managed to get all of these bollards in place with the chains up, and now that we have these gates that are kept closed except when someone has a need to come in, the desecration level has dropped off, and we're very glad to see it. I'm up here today trying to take care of some of the remote lighting so that we can kind of shine a light on things. And hopefully the kids will go away. I'm sure they'll do something else.
It's quite an improvement what you've been doing here, and it's really, really appreciated by people. I want you to know that.
Let's hope so.
Okay.
With that, the respect may increase. Keith, nice talking with you.
Nice talking with you,
Good luck on
Bob.
your project. We hope you guys can get this word spread far and wide so that there are people out there interested in preservation rather than desecration, or the stories that are out there about the different people who are buried or may not be into folklore or whatever.
Any place that anybody can go to, like a website or anything, like to donate? We could put that up.
Mostly just to the town, because the town does have some 22 different cemeteries that have perpetual care funds that have been added. If they want to donate, that would be the place. Now, if they want to donate specifically to this, then I would suggest that they go to the town clerk's office and they can be given the information there. This cemetery is West Greenwich 002. It is the Tillinghast lot. The town would be most grateful if people wanted to donate to support the preservation efforts. Thank you for asking.
Nellie Louise Vaughn died at the age of 19 from pneumonia. She was the daughter of George B. and Ellen Vaughn. Now, there was no vampire connotation associated with her name until after 80 years since she had died. Supposedly, she was mistaken for Mercy Brown. The story is some high school students came to this cemetery looking for the vampire girl who died at the age of 19 in the 1800s. They came across Nellie Vaughn's gravestone. They were actually looking for Mercy Brown, but they came to this cemetery and they found a stone that said age 19, and at the bottom was an inscription, "I am waiting and watching for you." Now, that was quite common at the time for a young person who had died before their time, and it simply made, "I am waiting and watching for you from heaven." Now, they didn't take it that way. They took it as, wow, we found our girl. We found the vampire girl who's buried here. And it just spread like wildfire, the legend that she is a vampire. Now, there are other legends that Nellie sometimes appears here, sometimes as a vampire or sometimes as a ghost, to eradicate her reputation, her undisturbed reputation for being a vampire. So she becomes a ghost. Hence, she tells people Nellie was never a vampire. Now, there is a story, this is in the New England Ghost Files by Charles T. Robinson, that a woman was here. She had been here often doing gravestone rubbings. Her husband had been scared out of here because he had heard a female voice tell him, "I am perfectly pleasant." Received some scratches on his face. He never came back here. But the woman herself came back. One time she was here doing some historical research, trying to do gravestone rubbings, which didn't work out because the paper would become wet. She tried to take pictures. The pictures of Nellie's gravestone would turn out in reverse, even on the negatives, whereas all the other photographs turned out normal. She was here again, and a young woman with long dark hair who claimed to be a member of a historical research society was also here and began a conversation with her. conversation was very pleasant until this young woman began obsessively repeating, Nellie was never a vampire. Nellie's not a vampire. Nellie's not a vampire. Well, this woman got a little nervous and turned to leave. When she turned back to look, this young woman who was dressed in modern clothing had vanished. So, some people think that was Nellie Vaughn, again, defending her reputation. And there's been sightings of a young woman in long Victorian clothes who has been seen wandering through this cemetery, or at one point she was sitting upon Nellie Vaughn's grave, stroking her long dark hair in an agitated manner, actually seemed to be floating several inches above her grave. So all this is legend, though. None of it can be really documented or proven. What we know is that there was no connotation with Nellie Vaughn about either being a ghost, a vampire, or a witch, or what have you, until over several decades after her death. Now, there's another story in this cemetery about the phantom dogs of Hell's Gate. Now, Hell's Gate is actually down the road on Plain Meeting House Road. Very, very difficult to find now. But there was an old recluse woman, according to legend, who lived there, and she was basically shunned by the town. Her only companions in her later life were two dogs, two mongrel dogs. Supposedly, these dogs appear around Hell's Gate. You can see them walking along the road. And they never actually come into this cemetery. They've been seen around the perimeter of the cemetery wall. And they won't come in. Whether they're warning people or guarding the area, we don't know. Back here during Halloween week 2006, I was here with author and paranormal researcher Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I was giving her a tour of this cemetery because she is an expert on folklore and vampire histories. Now, I was telling her about Nellie Vaughn. However, I had not told her about the phantom dogs of Hell's Gate who walk around the outside of this cemetery. Coincidentally, two dogs matching their description, two mongrel dogs, suddenly were outside of the cemetery gates here. Rosemary, who has a slight fear of dogs, suddenly stopped and froze solid, and it was then, only then, that I told her the story of the phantom dogs of Hell's Gate. Now, these dogs supposedly belonged to Mary Brown, a recluse who was accused of being a witch. Then again, you get the mistaken identity, confused with Mercy Brown, confused with Nellie Vaughn. And that's where the legend of Nellie becoming a witch kicks in. But the dogs simply walked away after barking a couple of times, and I went outside immediately, looked around the cemetery gates, and I didn't see them anywhere. Could they have gotten away that fast? It's possible, but just another mystery that probably has a natural explanation. But that's the story of the phantom dogs of Hell's Gate, another connotation with this cemetery, and Nellie Vaughn, and confusion with Mercy Brown.
I am not hugely impressed by the haunting aspect of the West Greenwich Cemetery where Nellie is interred. I have, on occasion, been there when there has been sort of a melancholy feeling in the area. I know that there have been a lot of experiences by other people, and I think possibly the reason for that is all of the ritualism that's been done there, all of the satanic rituals that have taken place have attracted some sort of negativity into the area, and it probably masquerades as Nellie Vaughn on occasion, but I do not think it is the spirit of Nellie Vaughn.
What about the phantom dogs that appear there sometimes?
Again, brought in by the satanic rituals that have been performed there, which we've certainly seen evidence of that when we visited the area.
Now, there was the acorn experience I had there once. I was with two friends. They were a teenage paranormal group, and I was mentoring them. We happened to be there. One of the young men was in a wheelchair, and all of a sudden, an acorn came flying out, hit all three of us. just like in billiards. It just did a triangle and it just hit us all like that, very forcefully, enough to make us jump. Now, is that theoretically possible? Yes. It's just very, very strange the way it just, as if somebody had shot at us, hit all three of us, and then went sailing away.
Odd occurrence. I have no explanation for that.
Well, I put it down as a coincidence, but it was something that I always remembered, something notable.
It's notable. Keith?
Yeah. It was very notable.
At midnight, all sorts of evil spirits are set loose. People disappear without a trace.
Last night, after a tiresome journey, I finally reached my destination, the castle of Count Dracula.
The ship seems burdened with a curse. One sailor and our cook have disappeared without a trace.
Nosferatu, the vampire, coming from 20th Century Fox. Nosferatu, the vampire, a film unlike any Dracula film ever made. Nosferatu.
Hello, welcome to Haunted Happenings with the Taunton Paranormal Group and the Paranormal Warriors of St. Michael. I'm your host, Jake, and I'd like to take a minute to say goodbye to our co-host, Lou. Due to personal reasons, Lou is no longer with Taunton Paranormal. Although we do have a new co-host to the show, and I'd like to welcome Scotty Rodriguez. Welcome, Scotty.
Thank you, Rob.
You're very welcome. The new co-host to Haunted Happenings. So it's a new date for us. We're moving forward in 2011 with a new co-host. So tonight we have a special guest. If you're familiar with the paranormal and watch any of the national shows, you'll be very familiar with our guest. I'd like to welcome Carl Johnson to the show. Welcome, Carl.
Hello, nice to meet you, and welcome, Scotty.
Thank you.
I understand you're conducting the whole interview tonight, so we're ready for you, or at least some of it.
Some.
That'd be a good point to break you in.
Just don't start laughing. If you feel the urge to laugh, suppress that. Don't start to laugh. Think of something unfunny.
That's easy.
So that'll make it worse.
See?
So as we have Carl on the show, can we get, for the viewers, a little bit of background on yourself that maybe drew you to the paranormal field?
Well, I was born in Rhode Island, lived most of my life in the state of Rhode Island, and there was some paranormal activity going on in my parents' house while myself and my siblings were growing up. We didn't call it paranormal back then, we just said haunted.
There's a ghost.
Yeah, there were haunted happenings in that house out in Situate, Rhode Island. Furnishings would move around. The furniture would be misplaced, sometimes wrappings on the walls. More interesting than that was the sound of children's voices running around the corner of the house.
Wow.
And kept things interesting from time to time. I mean, it was hard to call it a haunted house. We just had some things in the 1970s that we could not explain.
Right.
Until my sister Cynthia and I started to play on a Ouija board. Yeah, not normally recommended Ouija boards, but
no.
Everyone must make up their own mind how they feel about Ouija boards, the talking spirit board. So my sister and I placed our fingers on the planchette, started to move around as we asked our questions. It would spell out answers. And at one time, we asked the spirit of the board, "What is your name?" Spelt out Sylvia. And then, yep, Sylvia, S-Y-L-V-I-A. And then my sister and I asked, "Can you give us a sign that you're here?" And the planchette on the board spelled out cellar, C-E-L-L-A-R. So my sister and I left the table and went to the top of our basement stairs.
You were brave.
Yeah. We went to the top of the stairs. We didn't go all the way down into the cellar. Waited there about 15 minutes. We were just about ready to give up. As we were going back upstairs, we heard thump, thump on the wall. So we stopped, listened again, said, "Is that you?" About a minute later, we heard another 3 knocks.
Wow.
So we felt we had made communication successfully with the spirit world. It wasn't long after that where the figure of a woman started to appear downstairs in the cellar. I set up the basement room as my own room, my rec room, and moved a television down there, would sleep on the couch so I could have my own space.
Right.
Well, as I was setting up that room, I used to hear shuffling around. Now, we would hear that when we were upstairs, but this time I was right down there, and I'd hear moving around, look around, nobody was down there, no rodents would do this, and then I started to see the figure of a woman walking through. Now, she was quite clear. She was dressed in clothing of about a century before, in a black frock-type dress, black or actually light gray, and I could see her features in the dim light of the basement, and she would walk right by me.
How old were you when this happened?
Oh, it started when I was, well, the Ouija board use was when I was 15 and 16, but I
Okay.
started to see the apparition when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And I must have seen this figure 3 times, perhaps 4 times altogether, clearly. She would make no sound as she walked by me, and she seemed so solid that all I could think of doing was saying hello. And then within the span of maybe half a second, I realized that she was not of our time. She was out of place and out of time.
Right.
She walked by me soundlessly, and then I would call for somebody to come downstairs, and she would be gone. The manifestation would last about 10 seconds, which is a long time to be viewing a ghost.
Right.
You know. But within that span of half a second, I would realize I'm seeing something from another world. I'm seeing a ghost. And that panic would set in, and I'd be frozen to the spot.
Right.
Nowadays, I'd have the presence of mind. I like to think to bring out a camera and take a picture or try to record her sound, but though she wasn't making any sound at that time.
No, back then, obviously, you probably didn't even think or know, but looking back, would you said that was a residual or an intelligent haunt?
I would classify this one as intelligent. I have a reason for saying that. Responsive haunt, because I was recording some music down in that cellar, and when I played back the recording, I was there with a friend, my friend Mark. We both heard it. When we played back the recording, towards the end of the recording, it was on a cassette player, we heard what sounded like a voice in slow motion. And it sounded as though it was saying, "Someone help me."
Wow.
And we played that again and again, and it really did sound like a voice asking for help, a plea for help. Well, my friend had recording equipment. He sped that recording up to about 7 or 8 times its original recording speed. At that speed, the tonal quality sounds like a woman, and it says, "Carl, help me, help."
Wow.
Now that's before I had ever heard the term EVP, electronic voice phenomena, applied to a spirit voice. So I never knew what to make of that, still don't. I don't know how to help this spirit, but maybe sometime I'll find a way to. I don't know if this spirit was looking for passage to another dimension, another realm, was trapped there somehow. And the house was younger than I. The house was 6 months younger than I was.
Oh.
So perhaps it was the property there.
Right.
Perhaps it was the Ouija board usage that brought in a spirit, invited the spirit in. But it seemed to be intelligent, responsive, and had some kind of agenda in that it spoke a plea for help.
Oh, to hear a voice in itself would be eerie.
Oh,
but
yes.
to have it speak your name
Right.
must have taken it to another level completely.
Yeah. Well, that fixed my interest in the paranormal world, and studying things that are out of the ordinary and can't easily be explained.
Right, right.
Do you have a paranormal group now, and what's the name of it, and how did it come about?
I do. I am a member of Beyond the Veil Paranormal. That was founded by my girlfriend, Dina Palazzini, in 2009. So it's still pretty new. Now, Dina has always had experiences since she was the age of 3. She's empathic, intuitive. She sees spirit forms, hears them, and senses the emotion of living people around her. Not just deceased, not just disembodied spirits, but she feels emotions from living people. She can sense that.
Right.
So we founded Beyond the Veil Paranormal, actually it was her idea, to better explore these interests the way we do, specialized for us. So it's a small group. We intentionally keep membership small.
Right.
It works better that way, but we do work in cooperation with colleagues such as yourselves.
Right. I actually had a question for you. Before starting Beyond the Veil, now, as I mentioned, people, if they follow the paranormal, have obviously seen you on a couple of television shows.
They're out there, yes.
The first one that I was aware of was Ghost Hunters that you were on. Did you do anything prior to that for television, or did you start off as a group and work towards television with that?
I'd been involved in other paranormal investigative groups, the first one being at Rhode Island College. Now, I was attending Rhode Island College with some classes. I didn't register as a full-time student, and I was invited by a group there at Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island, to join PIRO, P-I-R-O. That's parapsychological. Back then, nobody said paranormal. We all said parapsychology. So that's Parapsychological Investigative and Research Organization. And I met these folks at a lecture presented by the famed ghost hunting couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed's deceased. He passed on 5 years ago.
Sadly, yes.
Yes, and we miss him. He was a driving force in paranormal exploration.
Right.
His wife, Lorraine, is still very active on the lecture circuit.
Definitely a pioneer in the paranormal,
Right.
and a sweetheart to boot.
She is indeed. Yeah, we've got to get her here for an interview. Her schedule is so full.
Well, we were fortunate. We did actually interview Lorraine last year.
Yeah. It was early last year.
For a woman of her age, I give her so much credit because she is like the Energizer Bunny. She just doesn't stop, and God bless her.
Yeah, I don't think I could keep up with her.
No, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But,
I actually had the privilege of lecturing with Ed and Lorraine.
Really?
Back some time ago, back in the 1970s, which you wouldn't recall, but there was this decade we referred to as the 70s.
I remember the 70s.
Yeah, styles were different. Yeah, I survived that. I don't show too many pictures of me from the 70s. But I was lecturing for a while with Ed and Lorraine Warren. Got to learn a lot from them.
Oh, I'm
and
sure.
that was a fun time, a golden era.
I would have loved to have met Ed. Although I've heard, Ed could be very, not difficult, tough. a very tough guy.
Oh yeah, he was the big guns.
Yeah.
He didn't come out and challenge Ed because he would speak out publicly for what he believed was right.
Right.
So
I've seen it.
Yeah.
There was actually a clip I caught, I think it was on the internet, where somebody challenged him, and I think it was the haunting in Connecticut.
Right.
And he went insane on the guy. He don't discredit him.
Well, while Ed and Lorraine's methods could be questionable at times, Ed was very adamant about supporting his own veracity. You know, if you said Ed wasn't right about something, or if you said Ed might be contriving evidence, or they were not someplace where they said they were, then Ed would come out and challenge that. Ed was a great debater, and he had a powerful, booming voice. You think I'm loud? Wow. Ed did not need a microphone, fill up an auditorium. And what a sense of humor they had together, Ed and Lorraine. They would start their little bickering routine sometimes during a lecture. Well, Ed, now, plug it in, Ed. We've got the slides. And it was just a pleasure to see them lecture together.
Yeah.
They're fondly remembered together.
Yeah, we're fortunate. I'll let you go to your question. But we were able to see Lorraine at a lecture, and it would have been nice to see them both. But.
Yeah.
Well, you may get your chance later this year in the autumn. She's very active, lecturing.
Right.
I try to see her every year if I can.
Is there a specific area of the paranormal that you deal with?
Well, yes, demonology. As a matter of fact, I am a paranormal investigator, and when we say paranormal, that is a multifaceted field of exploration, because we're dealing with everything from spirits, hauntings, to cryptozoology, which is unidentified, unaccepted by scientific research, animals or creatures.
Right.
UFOs, that could be encompassed in paranormal. But I specialize as a demonologist, meaning I am sometimes called in to assist with cases that are more hostile and threatening, where there seems to be a spirit that has a definite agenda, usually a hostile one. Now, we think these are otherworldly beings, not just human-generated spirits, but they come from some other realm, and they're ancient, have been around since time immemorial. There are a lot of theories, a lot of suppositions, and a lot of beliefs about what actually caused a demon, what created that.
Right.
Many people think they're fallen angels. All we know for sure is that they're here. They are generally more powerful with their energy output than the human-generated spirit, and they're not very friendly.
No.
Now, they cause trouble.
Right.
I mean, maybe there are demons that aren't threatening, but I don't hear about them.
Well, no.
No, nobody calls me in to explore something that's not bothering them.
Right. No, it's interesting. We've had quite the spike in demonic cases ourselves.
Yeah, why is that on the rise? It seems to be. Would you say the last 3 or 4 years?
Absolutely.
It's escalating?
Absolutely.
Maybe more people are willing to come forth and tell their stories. Maybe there are more instances.
I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, for more or less, the paranormal world has become more accepted with the television shows, and I think people are more willing to come out and say that they've had experience.
Yeah, now there's the push and pull, the good and not so good about these paranormal reality shows, in that they can be somewhat exploitative of people, of their results they get, what they showcase, but they have given a certain sense of legitimacy to paranormal investigation, and more people want to become involved in that.
Right.
And they're tackling some profound mysteries. Where do we go after we leave this world? After bodily death, does anything exist? Does anything continue? People want answers to those questions that religion doesn't and faith don't always supply. They want to take it a step further. They want something concrete, something that can be replicated, played back, and shown on a film.
Right.
Now, I brought a couple of the tools of a demonologist. They're not very scientific, but they are used. We have holy water, blessed by clergy, and the cross. Now, I've been appearing on episodes of The Haunted, shown on Animal Planet. That documents how animals respond to paranormal activity, and you will see this cross on every episode of The Haunted in which I appear. That's always with me. And another device which is not too scientific but seems useful are dowsing rods. Now, some surveying companies employ dowsers, people who seem talented at finding water lines under the surface of the earth.
Right.
We don't know how these work, some electromagnetic principle, but they can spin around, point, indicate, and they have been incorporated into paranormal investigation. So the code we use, people I associate with, most commonly use is for yes, affirmative. The rods will move towards the person, away from each other and towards the person.
Okay.
For no or negative, they'll stay out straight or cross over. They can point and indicate. And you don't lean them down. You try not to let gravity affect them too much. That's a small pair. They're easily transportable.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Your opinion, anyway, on the dowsing rods. That we've worked with some other groups, and not that this is a bash or anything by any means, but their opinions on what the dowsing rods did were slightly different. We were told that by holding the rods, the left was female, the right was male, and if it went in counterclockwise, it was a demonic entity, and if it went clockwise, it was a human spirit.
If you expect them to move and use those indications, I think the rods have to be trained, have to be housebroken. If you tell the rods that's what they're supposed to show, like left hand would be female, right would be male, then they should respond that way. I don't think there's one universal code for using the dowsing rods.
Okay. So in theory, they're responding to whatever energy the spirit or demon is throwing off.
Dina Palazzini, the director of Beyond the Veil Paranormal, fashions these dowsing rods, and she prays over them as she's making them. To see why we don't put sharp edges on them. They spin around. Let's see if I can get these to work. I've given demonstrations of the dowsing rods where they won't do anything. Just, come on, come on. They don't always move. See if I can get these to work now. Okay, I'm speaking to the spirit in the studio, or whatever spirit is near us and can respond. If you are here with us, could you move the rods? Point toward Jake. Can you do that?
That's interesting. Not necessarily a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you. They're warming up, it seems. There we go. So they're responding.
Right.
And I can't manipulate these without an obvious motion of my wrist. But
anybody that's used the dowsing rods would know, that...
Well, they give us a visual tool to
Right.
use, and they're safer than a Ouija board because you're not surrendering part of your body to them, really, what
Right.
you need to do for the Ouija board. Let's see. Could you spin one of the rods? That's why we don't put the sharp edges on these longer ones. There we go.
Right, yeah, those are quite long.
There you go.
Now, do you have a preference when using tools of the trade, like the dowsing rods or an EMF detector or a K2 meter, which essentially do very similar things?
Yes, and Beyond the Veil toolkit, I brought a K2 meter, brought an EMF detector, and the Gauss Master. I like using the Gauss Master because it will give you results. The EMF detectors, electromagnetic field detectors, will indicate fluctuations in the surrounding electromagnetic field. So
now, the Gauss meter, that's natural energy that it's picking up on, isn't it?
Yes.
Not necessarily, the EMF will pick up on man-made. Am I correct in that?
Well, the EMF will detect, it's a simple tool, but it's used by electricians, then incorporated into paranormal investigation. If there is a surrounding electromagnetic field, and really on some level there always is, that will indicate if it's a man-made charge, as you say, like an electric unit, that's going to indicate any change in the electromagnetic field. They should be sensitive enough to pick up on some emanations from the human body, but you have to hold it really close to the subject to do that.
Right.
Now, another instrument, which basically does the same thing, is the K2 meter. The difference with this one is lights up in a spectrum of lights.
Right.
Indicates any change in the surrounding electromagnetic field. Some people use a nickel, place in the tab, keep that going. And again, they give us a visual.
Right.
The Gauss Master EMF whirs, makes a whistling sound when it goes off, when it has a high charge, when it spikes. This one will just light up.
Right.
I've had good results with both.
And the theory on those, the more lights, the stronger the energy, making it either closer to you, or I don't know if it's necessarily a stronger spirit, but
well, it's stronger charge, or it has more energy at that time.
Right.
Now, we've gotten some interesting results, or very consistent results with the K2 meter. I've never seen it in any paranormal investigation in which I've been involved. I've never seen it spike up all the way, yes or no, for each question. I think that's dramatized when you see that. I don't trust that, really.
I know when we do our investigations, I prefer the K2 over the EM up. I think you do too.
Yeah.
You know, I find it more reliable. You know, the digital readout tends to fluctuate too much sometimes. So.
And with the Gauss Master EMF, if it's going off, especially you have brand new batteries in it and there's a high charge, it's very hard to shut it off. You have to kind of put it in your pocket or close it up, because sometimes it keeps giving that whirring sound.
Is that the same as a tri-field meter? Is it the same?
Tri-field meter is a little more involved. It's more sensitive.
Okay.
Pick up on a larger spectrum. But tri-field meter will do that too.
Yeah.
Sounds like tri-quarter. So we like the tri-master.
Let me see. Do you have any other questions regarding that?
Oh, I could think of questions for
myself. I've got questions. I was going to actually go to you work at Slater Mill.
Slater Mill. Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that, but we do have some pictures that you were nice enough to bring with you. If we could put those up on the screen, you could narrate those for us.
Yes, let's see what we have here. This is the exterior of Slater Mill, which was built in 1793, opened as the first successful cotton spinning mill in America, and was actually the beginning of our factory system in this country. It was the kickoff for the American Industrial Revolution. And in back we see the steeple of Pawtucket Congregational Church. Down below is Slater Dam, constructed between 1791 and 1792. So that's the front entrance. Oh, that's some of our people who attended the ghost tour. I started the ghost tours at Slater Mill so that people could come in and experience the paranormal activity within the old buildings for themselves. It's an enjoyable program and sometimes kind of spooky.
Now, is that what goes on at Slater Mill now? Is it strictly the ghost tours, or?
Oh, no, we're open for daytime tours. People interested in the history of Slater Mill can come in and explore the museums. The buildings on the site, the 3 buildings, have been restored as museums.
Now, is there another site that was replicated for that? The Slater Mill?
Not that I know of, no. Actually, it's always been there. Slater Mill, the building, has been there since 1793. The conjoining building, they're not connected anymore, but the building next to Slater Mill is the 1810 Wilkinson Mill, and that was constructed as a machine shop for Slater Mill.
Okay.
Also on the grounds is the Sylvanus Brown House, which was built in 1758, second oldest house in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and that was moved there in 1962 to make way for the expansion of Interstate Highway 95. And in my experience there, the Sylvanus Brown House is the most haunted building on the site.
Really?
Yeah, it has a definite personality, or personalities.
And what kind of activity would you find there?
Primarily, the spirit we've noticed in Sylvanus Brown House is that of a little girl named Becca. Oh. We call her Becca because she has spoken her name on 2 recordings. Now, conducting a paranormal investigation in the evening there, and Dina was present. This was in April 2009. Dina told us, the group and me, that she kept hearing Rebecca in her mind. She said, I can't shake it. I'm hearing Rebecca again and again. So when she was upstairs in the Brown house, Dina asked, what's your name, sweetheart? And when we play back the digital audio recording, you can hear Dina ask, what's your name, sweetheart? A little voice seems to answer, Becca. Then another lady in another investigation got the name Becca, again upstairs in the Brown house.
Wow.
Now, Dina was trying to reach the spirit of a child, of a girl, because on September 19th, 2008, I was giving a Friday afternoon tour of the site as an interpreter or tour guide at Slater Mill. And after our group left Sylvanus Brown House, a lady taking the tour told me she had something she needed to share with me. Well, before she left that day, the lady reminded me she had something to say. This lady related that when she was looking at the spices garden in back of the Sylvanus Brown House, she happened to glance up at one of the gambrel-style windows looking out from the unrestored bedrooms on Sylvanus Brown House 3rd floor. and she saw looking down at her the face and form of a little girl wearing a bonnet. Now the lady looked back down at the spices garden and somewhat apprehensively looked back up, and that little face was still looking down at her.
Wow.
I asked her, was it anybody who works here at Slater Mill in period costume? She said, no, this was a child in old-fashioned clothing. I know that lady was sincere because her bottom lip was trembling when she told me that.
It's too bad she didn't have a camera with her at that point.
And other people have seen a child in that house in old-fashioned clothes. She's been described as about 8 or 9 years old, wearing a white dress. One young man on a tour asked about who he thought was a reenactor. He said she walked from one room to another inside the Sylvanus Brown house while he was taking the tour, and she must have been wearing slippers because she didn't make any sound as she walked from one room to the next.
Wow.
And we have heard a child's voice humming, murmuring. Usually can't make out what she's saying, but when we've played music inside Sylvanus Brown house, she hums along with it.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
It's going to happen daytime or the evening tours.
And it's nice too that it was caught on 2 separate recorders. It kind of validates, you know.
Right, more validation, coupling, further confirming that there's some kind of personality there. And she's usually heard on the stairwell. She's been recorded, and we've heard her daytime tours, nighttime. What she says when she's on the stairwell is "oui." Now we don't know if that's French for yes or a child just saying
playful.
"oui." And I hear footsteps coming from the upstairs. If I'm down in the kitchen area, I'll go upstairs. Nobody's upstairs.
Wow, that's amazing. It must be great to work there.
Keeps it interesting. Yeah, it's a privilege
the history
to work
alone.
there.
At this point, we're going to have to stop. We're down to about the minute-and-a-half mark here for the show.
I told you this would go by quickly.
It is. It's amazing. And unfortunately, we are at the end of the show, but we'll definitely have to have you come back on for another interview. It would be great. So with that, we're going to wrap up this show for tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for watching and welcome Scotty once again as the new co-host to Haunted Happenings. You can tune in 2 weeks. We're going to have Carl back on, actually, again, to talk about another adventure that you were on. So with that, I'm Jake.
And I'm Scott.
Don't forget to look under your beds and in your closets before you go to sleep, because you never know who or what might be in there with you. Until next time, good night.
Good night.
It will either attack you or go to the person that originally came from. We recommend either burying it, usually getting it blessed, having it blessed, neutralized, and not throwing it out in the trash because somebody else is going to think, hey, look what I got, and
exactly.
Yeah, that's true. So either giving it to a church authorities. Some churches, I've heard some people say leave it on the church doorstep, but I don't know, then they might think that they're being a victim of cult attack or something like that. So I would contact them first, or one of us or somebody who has knowledge in it that would just basically bless it and then bury it.
But
yeah. Well, sometimes, but that of course, you don't want to risk that either, because sometimes that causes some retribution too. But I would keep
it intact.
Right.
Bless it and then bury it.
Yeah. My investigation I was on, the beginning of it, it never actually completed due to personal issues with family. But they were saying they were having some issues, and one of the key questions I was asking was, is there anything you've been doing in-house? Because had lots of changes, which is part of what might have been going on. And one of the children said, yeah, we use Ouija board. And I said, really, where is that? And the mother said, right here.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh,
yeah, once in a while, yes, exactly. You will come across that, where people just don't realize, what they're doing, and we're just playing a game. We just talk with friendly spirits, Well, that's, even if it is friendly spirits, that's still opening up a portal, and many spirits, they have the wisdom of the ages that they can masquerade as human spirits.
Opening a portal and not closing it. I just wanted to add that. They don't close the portals. And also, I also wanted to add that, it is just a piece of particle board and a piece of plastic, but you're asking a spirit to take control of your body. You're giving up your motor control. That's a form of possession.
Right.
Very dangerous.
Even EVPs, we're very, very careful about them. But, you know, when you're actually using a Ouija board to communicate, you're asking, you know, take over your motor control and move the planchette, so it's very dangerous. That's giving permission. Is there a question?
All right. I am going to interview Carl Johnson, my friend and colleague and partner. And I'm going to ask him some interview questions concerning the paranormal. And we'll begin with question 1.
Why do I look like a Danish bog find?
I don't think that was one of my questions.
Oh, that was my own personal observation.
Okay. What do you feel has been overlooked for the field of the paranormal to progress?
To progress, I think there has to be more of a dedication to finding the truth, not just self-aggrandizement. That people are too busy with blowing up the paranormal and say, let's find the ghost, let's find something strange, let's see something move across the table, let's hear a voice, let's get on television for it. So I think to make it a more serious study, people have to get to the center of the issue. You know, just analyze your evidence, collect evidence, analyze it, subject it to rigorous analysis, and that will make progress. It won't provide a lot of answers, but it could lead to some. So just stop paying so much attention to why did that candlestick move across the counter? Why was there a rap on the wall? I mean, you know, wow, what is that? Isn't that great? All right, find out what caused it, what's at the core of it. Try to analyze that. And just be after spectacular results.
So do you think that paranormal television has gone the way of entertainment rather than getting to the core of the truth, you know, scientifically?
I don't know. I don't watch it myself. Do you? No, of course. I've seen some of it. I kind of resist watching myself on television. Yeah, it's done some damage because while it's brought more attention to paranormal studies, it's popularized the paranormal. And people seem to be satisfied with the thrills. Wow, we got a picture of what's supposed to be a ghost on television. You know, we heard, you know, that voice, that EVP, and then it just ends there. And people think that's proven the existence of spirits. By the way, you want me to look at you with the camera when I talk? What do you want? I'll look back and forth.
Either.
Yeah. Look prettier
you can
in
look
person.
at the audience.
Look nicer in person, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look at the audience. But people, as I was saying before, they want these spectacular results. They want to see the ghost, hear the ghost, and the general viewing audience thinks that's proven the existence of life after death, and it really hasn't. It's just shown that, like, yeah, there's something strange that showed up on the film, or some voice showed up. And of course, there's no guarantee that's legitimate, because you're seeing what the cameraman and the editor in the studio decide you're going to see.
As we both know, we've been on television before, we know how they work.
Well, I'm not saying it's all faked. It's probably about 90% of it or so. Just on a guess. Of course, there are sincere efforts being documented. But paranormal, reality television, especially when applied to the paranormal themes, is an oxymoron. You know, it's an entertainment. And it does increase people's interest in researching the paranormal. But it's not an end in itself, or shouldn't be regarded as such.
Okay. Isn't it true that the paranormal field of study has succumbed to deception and fakery on television, like we were just discovering or talking about? How do you feel we can turn that around for television so that audiences will take more interest in the field?
Well, I'm under contract not to discuss that. What is it, 12:01? No, I can talk about it now. It's after midnight. No. How would you phrase that again? Is it more succinctly? Ask that again, please.
Succumb.
Succumb to? Well, yeah. Obviously, it should be obvious that there's a lot of contrivance going on in the reality shows. I think everybody has to take an objective approach to those shows if they're watching them, and not go into them convinced that what you're going to be seeing is real, but just look at it objectively. See, do I believe this? Do I believe everything they're purporting, everything they're showing me? But when it is revealed that a lot of this is contrived, it shouldn't discourage people from continuing to research paranormal issues, because there is some legitimacy to it. There is some genuine paranormal phenomena.
Is it possible that we can get people interested in watching a paranormal program on television without fakery? That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I think absolutely it is. It's just going to have to run into some situations where nothing much happens. And I think that should only serve to increase people's interest in the paranormal, because you don't always capture the ghost, you don't always capture the disembodied voice. And it can still be interesting because you're making the effort, you're showing genuine paranormal research techniques. So it's not necessary to fake things. People do like to see the ghost. I mean, I direct a public ghost tour program at Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where I'm employed. And it's not dependent on paranormal activity, but we always do get something, greater or lesser. But I find that everybody wants some kind of paranormal activity. They want to be proven there's something beyond what we see, and perhaps something a little scary. And it doesn't need to be contrived. They don't need to have spectacular results all the time. That's what apparently keeps the shows in business, but they're going to have a falling out after a time. It's had more than a decade-long run now, these shows. And I'm not putting them down as a whole. It might seem I am, but I don't think they need to be dependent on such overt, spectacular results all the time. It can be that people go in and sincerely look for something, analyze their evidence. I think that would lead to a greater sense of satisfaction when they do get results, be they meager or something grander.
Okay, thank you. Do you feel that a demonic entity can be bound to a piece of land or cursed to reside in a certain space, which may in turn wreak havoc on anyone in its vicinity and cannot be banished if it is God's will to be there?
I think that's overstating it. I don't think a malevolent attachment to property or possession will affect everybody who comes into close proximity of that land or that object. No, it can affect sensitive persons. I do think some presence can linger when it's attached to an object or an area. Yeah, it can, but it's not going to affect every single person that goes there. I don't think.
Same. It won't affect everyone the same.
Right. I don't think when somebody selling Encyclopedia Britannicas, if they still do that door to door, is going to experience an eerie feeling, but many sensitive people will. Yeah, I think so. It's not on such a large scale, but there can be a presence or personality or influence attached to certain physical objects or spaces of land. Of course, I have to answer longer than your question was.
Do you feel that banishments of these demonic spirits are always successful then?
No, it's not always successful, but it's largely associational. If somebody knows an area is haunted, it's going to affect them more, or supposed to be haunted. But there are some times when there can be a particularly malicious or malevolent, or let's say inconvenient influence attached to that area, or to that object, or to that house, and many people are going to report feeling that, sensing that. It can't always be banished. With time it will fade, yes. And if people really annoy that presence enough and keep telling it to leave, or even try to reason with it as if it was an intelligent presence, an intelligent human being even, then it could respond. It fades with time. So yes.
Isn't acknowledgement also something that could keep it around?
Yes, if people go in and really fret about it and try overt efforts to banish it and tell it to go away and cast it back to the infernal regions, that could even empower such a presence. I think it's best to let it fade with time. If it's ignored, it tends to lose its power and go away. It's not always possible to ignore it, especially if people are living there or around there. If it's approached with some sense of detachment, if this entity is told to leave, that will weaken it.
You know, as long as people don't put a lot of emotion into it.
Right. Okay.
There are persons who do seem genuinely talented at banishing such entities or such presences, and they can be valuable. But again, I think they tend to annoy the entity enough that it eventually wants to leave.
Okay, thank you. How has your views of haunting and ghosts changed throughout the years?
Well, I did previously divide them into separate categories. There was always the inhuman, demonic, or poltergeist, which we think poltergeist, noisy ghost in German, is attached to a particular individual. There's the intelligent, human, responsive spirit, which we think, or did think, is generated by a once living human being. There are elementals, there are residuals. Elemental would be like a nature spirit attached to natural properties and elements. And residual haunting is just a playback out of time. It is somehow imprinted on the ether, or the atmosphere, you might say, around us. And when the earth is in a certain position, and it could be annual or under certain conditions, when those conditions are repeated, you have that playback out of time. You're looking at a scene from the past, and they are not aware of us. But I don't make those stringent divisions so much anymore. I think they're all related. They're somewhat interrelated. And I see them as all having a common source now. Because sometimes residual haunts, so-called residuals, have an awareness of us, or a quasi-awareness for some limited times. And poltergeist, which is supposed to be dependent on another human being, or living human being, don't always seem attached to a certain person. And they just tend to blend more. And paranormal just means something that's separated from that which is normally understood and accepted. And so I tend to lump them all together more than I used to. Combine these different so-called categories.
Well, they do, possibly coexist in the same
they're in
realm.
This nether region that
there
we don't
has
quite
to
understand.
be some kind of connection.
The spirit world, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't say that demons are always, for instance, to use an archaic term that's popular now, that demonic entities are separated from the human-generated entities. I think they have a common source. I don't think the ghosts are necessarily remnants of departed human beings. That they're always part of our psyche that lingers. I tend to combine these categories more than I used to, just to sum it up.
Okay. Why do you feel that it is important for people to know that the paranormal field is real?
Well, it's not important for everybody to believe that. I don't think everybody needs to accept that. I just don't agree with persons who say it can't be real, that there's nothing to it. That's a very, two-dimensional approach to what is obviously real. There is paranormal phenomena. It's prevalent. It goes around. And I think one needs to experience it to believe in it. There are some things you just cannot explain away empirically. Sometimes the ghosties do go bump in the night. And I think a general acceptance of this would promote it as a legitimate avenue of research. So I think it's important that people at least allow for this being possible, that these things that are unexplained do occur, and they occur regularly. And it's a region that's largely unexplored, despite all the interest in popular ghost hunting. People haven't devoted a serious study to it to the point that I would like to see it done. So I think that's why it's important. If it's going to gain any sense of legitimacy to the general public or to standardized academia, then it needs to be taken somewhat seriously, viewed as real, as genuine. But it's not for everybody. Not everybody cares that there are spirits around or whatever causes these things. But if it is somebody's interest or if it's affecting them, then yes, they do want to know. And some of those answers have to be brought out and clarified as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question. Can science eventually prove that the spiritual realm exists, or does the spiritual realm possibly consist of properties of another dimension, which cannot be proven by our current scientific formulas?
That's very well put. Did you write that? That's terrific. Yeah. Oh, unknown, really. I don't know if science, as we consider science to be, an analytic approach, I don't think it will ever be able to definitely prove the existence of higher dimensions, and as they apply to we human beings. But I don't know. Maybe it will. We've got to keep striving to and get clumps of evidence from time to time, try to create a bigger picture. I don't know if science will be able to come up with it. We just need to keep trying. Depends on what science can bring us 10, 20, 30 years from now. I would like to see serious efforts made toward substantiating the existence of other dimensions. Well, physicists speculate on higher dimensions or other dimensions apart from ours. But are they ghost worlds? Don't know. I think we'll be able to get more tantalating evidence. And I might change my answer 20 years from now. I might say, hey, they were onto something. Or, no, we're not going to find it. No. Can we start these all over again? Because I might answer them differently.
No, you won't.
No. I think I'd say pretty much the same thing.
Okay. Well, do you appreciate you answering my questions?
Well, you can show your appreciation by answering some of my
questions.
Right,
I will do that. All right, thank you, Carl Johnson.
Oh, thank you, Miss Lana Brock.
New England Anomalies Research.
Yes.
I did that without a stammer. You did that well. And tonight we're just going to ask a few questions. They've been kind enough to come along and answer a few questions for us. Because back in Australia, we are unaware of the work that they do, and thought we'd learn a little bit about it tonight. So, ask a few questions. I mean, the obvious question to all three of you is...
How did we meet Sandra?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that one. We've got to start a little bit back at the beginning first. First question would be or obvious question would be how you both, well, first of all, the early days, how you two got into hunting ghosts and demonology, specifically demonology, how you went into that field.
Well, we grew up in a house where there was some paranormal activity, and it increased as the years progressed. We became very interested in exploring the supernatural. Of course, there wasn't much of an outlet for young guys to do that back then. There was no internet. There were really no ghost groups out there, so we formed our own. Just did it basically freehand, examining our own home and our own hauntings. And as the years progressed, we also became more and more interested in inhuman spirit phenomena, not just ghosts per se, but demonic, and specifically with me it was demonic and angelic I became increasingly interested in.
So what made you go into or even think about the non-human demonic side of it?
Partially it was because of our religious upbringing. We were brought up in a Christian household. Carl became more interested in the demonic per se. I was very interested in angelic and demonic, because these were things that had never walked the earth in human form as we know it. It's a separate entity from, say, what would be considered human spirit. And that really fascinated us because there wasn't a lot of material about it at the time, at least none that we could find. So we wanted to explore it. That's basically what started us, yes.
So you were more into the demonology at the beginning?
Mm-hmm. Well, the difference being these malevolent spirit forms that seem somehow stronger and even more aware and more calculating, more intelligent than what would be assumed to be a typical ghost type, which is thought to be the remnant of a human being. These seem to have an agenda of their own, these demonic forms. And we first encountered demonic presence when we were called into our first case, very first organized paranormal investigation that Keith and I, in someone's home, Keith and I engaged in, turned out to be a full-blown demonic case. So that increased my interest in this realm of the demonic.
So it was after you encountered it that you went more into that?
Precisely, yes.
That wasn't before?
Because I was speculating what kind of force could do this. Do they exist apart from what we consider the spirit realm? Are they their own types of energy and entity? And they seem to be. The demonic form, the demonic spirit, is stronger than the typical ghost, than the human-generated spirit. They seem to be able to generate more psychokinetic force. They can move larger objects around. They seem more destructive, more malevolent, more intent on causing strife and discord in a family unit particularly. They don't always seem to stick around as long as the other type of spirit, the ghost. A ghost can have a presence generated for decades. The demonic force seems to enter, do its mischief, and then depart after a time. Perhaps it runs out of energy. Perhaps there are certain restrictions it has to abide by, but it doesn't seem to linger as long.
So would that be similar to a poltergeist?
Poltergeist is another form of
Or is that
inhuman
just a
entity. Yeah. In some senses, it could be related to demonics, but the difference with a poltergeist is it seems to be generated by the human occupants, the residents in a house. The more we study them, the more other people have examined these forces. They seem to be dependent upon the human occupants in the house and feed off of them, perhaps even be produced by them. It doesn't seem to have as much of a mind of its own. It seems more mischievous, if anything, and they don't last long. They may recur, they may even follow people, but they don't seem to last as long as a demonic, or especially the human type of spirit.
So Sandra, how did you get involved in the demonology side? Was that your views when you came into it?
Did we have anything to do with it?
What did you?
You did.
Actually,
I met and married my husband, and he was a paranormal investigator with a demonology focus, and I started investigating with him, and I fell right into it, and I was fascinated, and it's been my passion ever since.
So is demonology specifically a passion of yours as well?
Inhuman spirits, inhuman hauntings, yes.
So what's your definition of, I mean, if you go into a place that you've been called into, how would you define an inhuman entity from a human spirit?
There are definite signs that, well, when I say definite, they indicate a demonic presence, but they do have definite categories of phenomena. If children are in the house, they will report seeing some ominous-looking specter, and often these apparitions are seen missing a body part. Frequently the eyes, the children will report seeing this, like dark man, this evil man who is coming to their bedrooms or following them. And often they report that they don't have eyes, and then after a time the adults may see these apparitions. Foul odors, unpleasant scents that seem to invade the house and then recede just as suddenly. That might be indicative of demonic presence. Slashes on people's bodies, and they wake up with marks on their skins, or sometimes not even when they're sleeping. Bruising, there's assaults. Something that might seem like a human soul initially, but then takes on a darker aspect, evinces more malevolent behavior, and seems to just cause disruption within the family unit. People start to quarrel among themselves in ways they didn't before. Tension escalates. Those may be indications of demonic presence and will proceed as such if all those signs, or even some of those signs, are present.
So are your views the same on what demons are?
Well, in their manifestations, but not in all ways on their origins. I seem to think they have more of a human influence to them, that human beings influence and in many cases produce these demonics. I theorize that perhaps a human soul or a human remnant of a human personality could, under certain circumstances and conditions, degenerate into what we classify as a demonic entity. views on that, which are more classical.
I think they're something other than human spirit. I think they're a separate species of themselves. I think they were never human. I think they existed before humanity, and they have their own society, so to speak. They're a separate species, a spiritual species, but very separate from human beings. They've never walked the earth in human form as we know humanity, and they have the wisdom of the ages. They possess the wisdom of the ages. Usually when it's a demonic haunt, it will be very systematic. They will be trying to break down a person's psyche so they can infiltrate that person, break them down, make them pliable, brainwashing, so to speak, through terrorism. It's terrorist tactics. And things will happen systematically. For example, things will happen in threes. You get 3 knocks. Things will come in threes. That's one sure indication. Certain people will be targeted. They'll be targeted, and the spirit will play upon their weaknesses. What frightens them, that's what it will use. If they have a psychological weakness, it will use that and employ to break the person's psyche down.
And although I have differing views on what might be their origins, it's all unknown, and I've observed they do seem responsive to a religious provocation. That's a commonality with a demonic influence.
So is that how you would test it when you go into a place? Would you
That would be
give
one
some
test.
religious provocation to see if it does react?
I think many times our clients, coupled with the groups that have called us in, because many times we're not called in as near, we're called in as consultants for other paranormal research groups. And they've already pretty much done the research and come up with the fact that they're dealing with something out of their league.
Yeah. And when you go in, and do you handle, if you think it's a non-human spirit, would you handle that completely different to if it was a human spirit when you go in on an investigation?
Generally, we would handle it very differently. Of course, it depends upon the client, too. We have to take the client into consideration, how they're going to react, what their mental and emotional state is at the time. Usually, they do request a blessing or some kind of religious cleansing from us. They know that that's what we do, so they usually request it. It's sometimes difficult getting the family to cooperate in the exact way which would be helpful, but we would, when it gets to that point, we do handle it differently. I mean, we go in with the general equipment like other organizations would and other investigators. That's how we start out. But finally, we're offering a solution, which a lot of other groups do not necessarily offer a solution. They'll say, yes, we think you have phenomena here. Goodbye. And keep in touch. But, we're there to try, hopefully, to offer a solution. And mainly what we do is try to educate people what they're going through, what they might expect, and how they themselves can also take action to try to alleviate this type of trauma, this haunting they're going through.
So I've heard you talking about spirit rescue, you mentioned that as well. Is that different to if you were handling it on?
Well, that's something different. That's something Carl's worked with before in the past.
So you haven't worked with that?
Well, how would you define spirit rescue?
Well, you try to communicate with the spirit, with the personality, the disembodied presence, and try to get it to move along or at least move away. Try to detach it from the family and its influence over the household. You can do this by speaking to it, especially somebody who has mediumistic abilities, somebody who's a sensitive psychically. They might try to communicate with the spirit, actually communicate and reason with it, and it has seemed effective. Ask the spirit to move on. You might say move into the light, whatever the light is, but just cross over into some other plane of existence, no longer being earthbound. That's not effective with the demonic presence. It can actually antagonize the demon or be totally ineffective altogether. So that's another way, that's another strategy to test whether it's the ghost type or the demonic, the inhuman.
And would you find more inhuman cases that are coming your way compared to human type?
Interesting question. Yeah.
And is it getting more? Or?
There's a certain type that we're specifically called into. So quite often it does turn out that we are being called into something because of our specialty, because that's what we specialize in. somebody calls us in, we think we might be, say if it's another organization, other investigators, we think we might be dealing with something that's demonic or inhuman, then they call us in. So we tend to see this more than the average investigator because we're called at that point. But also, I have to say, what we deal with a lot is the human aspect, like I was mentioning before. Where's the client coming from emotionally, psychologically, because they could easily be adding to the problem or being manipulated. So it's not that cut and dry. There's a lot of times where somebody's really, dealing with something and they have to make a major life change in themselves too, or in their family, if they really, really want to get rid of this. It's like with alcoholism or addiction to nicotine. They have to really want to get rid of it, and they have to do something to change their lifestyle. Or dietary, eating habits. See, something radical has to change.
Do you find that some people do attract this more?
Yes, some people do. And I think Keith will agree that we found, Sandra will agree that we found that in cases of a demonic invasion, there seems to be some seriously unaddressed or unresolved conflict within the family unit or within an individual. These are instances where the boundaries between psychology and what could be termed parapsychology become less distinct because there's some kind of antagonistic influence. Something is not right. There's an imbalance, and that imbalance needs to be addressed. Often the paranormal activity is the symptom, the scab on the wound, rather than the cause of the strife within.
So they sorted it out with them.
And so we may recommend that they conduct certain lifestyle changes, alterations in the way they conduct their affairs. If there's the presence of substance abuse, well, we act as counselors too. We may go to that step where we actually advise them you need to evaluate what you're doing with your life and how you're living your life. Perhaps the substance abusing could be partly responsible for this strife within the family. And we find often people resist that. It's a principle I term transference, and it's a psychological principle where the person will project their unrest and their imbalances onto an invading disembodied entity. And that's comforting in a way, because you can say, now that this demon is here, we have all kinds of problems in the house, and we wouldn't have them if the demon was chased out. And it alleviates the responsibility. They can abdicate that responsibility for examining and restructuring their own lifestyles.
So do you find if the people themselves are religious based, it works better when you're working with the entity?
Generally, yes. Yes, exactly. If they have a religious outlook, then that's something we can relate to and deal with accordingly.
I find it even more helpful if they're mentally healthy. Because we have a lot of problems with people contacting us that, as Carl was saying, have mental difficulties, and it's one of our biggest challenges to tease apart what is paranormal and what is has something to do with the person's psychology.
Because I have seen in your site and talked to you, and you've said that you always look at that, which is good. Okay, so cases. What would be the most outstanding case that you've had that you can think of?
Well, I would say a case of possession. It was the possession of a 14-year-old boy, and there was a lot of phenomena going on. A lot of psychological aspects too, obviously, and also a difference in religious views. So it was very difficult, very, very difficult case to work with. So that was, in some ways, very, very outstanding. I mean, our first case was outstanding too because of the aspects in that involved the family. But in this case of possession of the 14-year-old boy, it was, we worked so closely with him, and we became so involved in the case that we actually did become a big part of it. So that was what was outstanding about it, because of the external phenomena going on, the spiritual and psychological aspects too.
And it was a success, I think.
That's kind of not a 100% success like I'd like, you
Yeah.
know, but there was some success. I wouldn't say it was 100% resolved, but was interesting, and we did help all we could.
Can you find out which was your most outstanding case to be?
Well, the first case that comes to mind, I guess that kind of stands out for me, is a case where Keith and I were called in to assist TAPS. The ghost hunter team was actually called in initially on this particular case, and I guess for different reasons, the client didn't own the condo where the activity was taking place, and the owner of the condo didn't want the publicity. So Keith and I were called in to go in off camera with members of TAPS and New England Paranormal and work on this case. And what I found interesting was, well, first of all, there were children involved, and they were being victimized. And then secondly, the female head of the household was experiencing fainting spells, and actually while we were there had a scratch appear on her cheek, on her face. And at one point during the investigation, Keith and a few of the other investigators had been called down to the other end of the condo where a door was opening and closing. And I was there in the dark with the night shot camera and the woman head of household and her significant other. And at that point she claimed that she felt that the malevolent entity was there in the room with us. Personally, I didn't feel anything, but I took her word for it, and I actually started doing a blessing and attempting a banishment simply on her word. And what we found later on the tape was that I was in direct contact and conflict with the entity, because the entity was actually mocking what I was saying. So that kind of stands out in my mind.
So you're actually caught.
I feel like I was
Voices
having an
and
effect on the
Yeah.
situation, you know, by using the religious provocation
Yeah.
that I was using.
Did that work out well?
Well, we did wind up doing, Keith and I did wind up doing a full blessing on the condo, and we were able to manage to lessen the activity. However, eventually the clients did move out.
Right. So do you find that it's successful completely often moving or getting rid of, or do you find that it can go quiet for a while and then
I think a
come
lot
back
depends
in
on the
again?
client.
Right, on how.
If there's follow through with the client and they actually take the advice that we give them, fill the void, if we've actually done a banishment and nullified whatever entity was there, they need to come in and fill that void with positive energy.
Right.
And if they don't do that,
Comes back
if
in.
they don't make the changes that, you know, are recommended, then ultimately they're going to be back in the same situation.
What case can you remember?
Well, I've been actively involved in 5 demonic cases, but I would say my first involvement was not a demonic case. It seemed to be the ghost spirit type, but this was within the house where I was living. It was my parents' house, and because the entity was manifesting in my bedroom, that was somewhat disturbing at the time, or at least it had my attention. But that's probably my most outstanding case that I was exploring. I had no choice but to be interested in it. It probably started when I was speaking on a Ouija board, playing on a Ouija board with my sister. That might have provoked it, or at least intensified it. But a spirit in female form of a woman, was seen walking, rather gliding across the floor of my bedroom in the basement. She seemed to be taking steps but making no sound, and actually seemed to be elevated some inches off the floor. And she was quite solid seeming. But then she would walk through the curtain and vanish. And it seemed to have left a message
on a cassette recording where it mentioned my name. It said, "Carl, help me, help." And I saw it on several occasions. Never knew what to make of it, never knew how to help it, at least not yet. But I think that was outstanding to me, that I actually got to witness the spirit and be cognizant of that, analyze it in some part of my mind. I probably would have had more presence of mind now if I saw that. In fact, I'm certain I would, but I was just dumbstruck. And one time I said hello to this entity, to this apparition, and she vanished.
So do you think with all the experience you've had now, you would be more capable of helping?
I'd like to do it over again, yes. I did see a ghost form, which actually is a probable demonic case as recently as January, but it had been many years since, between when I saw this entity. Yeah, I would be better equipped to handle it now. Not that I know that much more, if any more, really, but I would have more self-containment. I wouldn't be so dumbstruck and unable to function while I was watching this. If I had a camera, I hope I would think to level the camera at this entity and run a tape recorder. Because I have had that daunting experience where I'm watching, observing phenomena, or listening to it. I don't think of turning my tape recorder on, don't think of raising the camera and taking it, because you're just frozen there. You want to experience it, but you also want to record it to analyze afterwards.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of groups out there, an awful lot of groups starting up, and especially in Australia as well, we don't really have a lot of groups that probably even understand demonology, never mind heard of it, which is quite interesting. So what advice would you give to those groups that want how to handle it?
Well,
apart from getting an expert in. Unfortunately, in Australia, we don't have an awful lot. So
you have an important...
Apart from we call you and ask for advice.
Maybe because of the sparse population in much of the country, that could have something to do with it. I would say initially, don't expect to ever find absolute resolution or understand what you're dealing with, because there really aren't answers that we have access to. And keep a strong sense of purpose, that you're there with a forthright intent, and good, at least in this realm, is stronger than evil. And these are vapors. If you give them too much credence, they'll take on more substance. If you're assured, if you believe, with some healthy respect to these powers, if you believe that you can be stronger through your own good intent, your own willingness to help the clients and to learn, then you can prevail against these. They'll flee from you, or they'll just get exasperated and dissipate. But I would think, keep your own sense of your purpose, and don't expect to really understand what you're dealing with, because they sometimes morph and defy description, even within the strictures that we assign them. Sometimes they just do the unexpected. That's more like a human-type spirit. This is inhuman. Well, isn't that a poltergeist? Is that residual replaying itself? Sometimes they all seem to be present. So you're not going to get a heck of a lot of definitive answers. Don't get frustrated.
Right now, I'm actually consulting with a group in Australia on a potentially demonic case. They think it might be inhuman, so I'm consulting with the group leader for that. Also, I'm training someone in Australia on some of the aspects of demonology and how to apply it in a practical level, like an on-site case or something like that.
Don't you think you've told her too much?
No, not really.
Really?
Got all the inside information on that, yeah. Right. So.
But that's what we, we're constantly getting emails and calls from other groups that think that they are in contact with an inhuman entity and want our input. And of course, Keith and I have the running joke about the near jet, which really doesn't exist. We wish it did. But we can't personally go out, fly out and mentor these groups. So, I mean, that's the best case scenario, that people who come to us, that we can actually direct them to a mentor, whether it be one of us or someone closer to their area. Australia, that's a bit difficult.
We'll just have to fly you out so you can personally mentor.
If the client or the investigator has religious beliefs, then that makes it a little bit easier. If they're coming from a Christian background, they can get the clergy involved, and that is one other option that's looked at.
If the group or the group leader isn't of a religious background, can they still help in any way?
They can, because a lot of it's dealing with the client themselves and helping them to focus on a solution rather than the problem, because these people do get very, very obsessed with what's going on. And once they, even if you do offer a solution, that leaves a void, a vacancy. They're so used to being harassed like this. There's a lot that has to go on afterwards, a lot of follow-up, a lot of counseling. And it's best to go in with a very strong personality and a very positive outlook.
So as long as you're just a positive person, positive outlook, you should also be able to, and obviously with knowledge, you should also be able to help.
Yes, you should be able to help, depending on the individual client as well, too.
Now, Anna wants to know. One of
Anna
Anna's
wants to know.
questions, because I did question my team, so is there anything you want to know while I'm interviewing?
Okay.
Twins.
There's a lot of that going around.
Well, there has been since I got here. She wants to know, is it true that twins can...
No.
It isn't.
Absolutely not. I've tested it.
You've tested it.
Seriously.
So there's not
over and over and over again. There's nothing to
There's
it.
no truth in it at all.
Well, she's pinched me. It never seems to affect him. A kick here and there.
Well, she's supposed to have this.
Well, there's a.
You mean twin telepathy, right?
Connection.
Twin mystique. It's a myth.
It's a myth.
Well, there is something to the like you say, the telepathic connection. I mean, as far as.
Not as far as these two go, but maybe
other
twins.
Well, I've got another twin standing behind me. Do you find this? No?
No.
We have a lot
It's
of
all been blown out the water.
common experiences. Common experiences.
Right. There's a lot of.
Sorry, Anna.
Sorry to disappoint you, but I've tested it over and over again, and take my word for it, it is a myth.
Anna, the thing is that there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of thought process because of the upbringing, and even if twins are separated, there's similar thought process, but there are individual personalities, and say like Sandra and I, because we're married, we can anticipate each other's feelings very, very well. But there is a synchronicity in events as well.
He reads my mind much better than he can read his brother's.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But mine tends to get convoluted and tied up.
I think that's also has to do with attitude too. If you want to be open-minded and you feel close to somebody, then you get to know them. You can naturally anticipate their feelings, their moods, their emotions, even from a great distance. And that telepathy, even if it's many, many miles away or across an ocean, I think that you can kind of get in sync with somebody so that you have that empathy and that telepathy with them. So you automatically know if they're in trouble. You will be given a sign, so to speak. And I believe there's spirit guides that help out in that too. And by the way, Anna, you're a wonderful, wonderful person.
Hi, Anna.
And Amy.
But with no twins.
And Amy is wonderful too.
Say hello to my whole team.
Oh yes, we love PFI very much, very much. You're all wonderful,
We're
wonderful
fans.
Except for the director.
We want to investigate with you.
You have a
Well, that was
wonderful,
the very last question.
wonderful director.
The very last question from PFI, my team, that they sent me is, when are you all coming over to Australia? As soon as
We're
possible.
working very hard on winning the Powerball.
Yes,
Do
we
it more
are.
quickly.
Yes, we are working.
I'm
very
saving
hard.
for it actually, starting today I have been. I saved my change after dinner. But it's going to be mounting, yeah.
No,
well, we would
it's
like
Is
to.
it nickels there?
Huh.
It's like
Pennies,
nickels. I said to Allison months ago, back in March, we were talking about getting together and how she wished she could come over here, and I said to her, you never know what tomorrow brings, what the future holds, and she agreed with me, and here she is now.
Here I am.
Yes. See, here she is, right here.
Right.
Oh, sorry. There she is.
My legs don't.
Oh, your legs are, there's no more circulation.
Here I am.
Yes, see? So that's proof that
So
it
who
can happen.
knows? Yeah, it can happen. I mean,
Don't damage the interviewer here.
No.
I think it's just
She's
a
gotta
matter
walk
of,
out
like,
the
you
door
know,
yet.
setting
No,
an
we're not going
objective,
to plane
yeah.
tomorrow. I think my legs are broken. I just have to stay.
You'll just have to stay some longer, won't you?
You see, you just reminded me again that I'm going tomorrow. That's not so. Okay, so I think that's probably it for now. I thank you for giving me a bit of your time.
My pleasure.
Quite bits out. Am I showing or am I?
Just
or are you
legs.
just?
No, it's
I'm
fine,
joking.
it's
Just two
wait.
disembodied legs.
Sneaker interview.
Because I can't cut those out.
Going to a commercial break now.
I bet you don't do this in your interviews. I'll just take a break now, have a look at the questions.
We have no time for breaks.
No. Questions all right?
Say, you do have dinosaurs on your tour? Hello? I really hate that, man.
Listen, I don't know how much.
Microfiche from a newspaper in the Pawtucket Library, Pawtucket Public Library. So it's true, it's a true story, I believe it. The story tells us that back in the mid-1950s, there was a married couple residing in Cumberland, Rhode Island. The wife had become terminally ill. She knew her husband was having an affair with her own sister. So this wife said to her husband, as wives sometimes will, you know, if I should die before you, and you marry my sister, I'll come back to haunt you. Well, as fate would have it, this lady did pass on prior to her husband. She was interred in Precious Blood Cemetery in Woonsocket. Her husband, their widower, did marry her sister. Well, in that great flood resulting from Hurricane Diane, August 1955, that lady's coffin was one of those washed out of its grave in Precious Blood Cemetery. Slid down the muddy earthen embankment, went into the Blackstone River, was carried away by the current of the Blackstone, and that woman's coffin came to rest on her former husband's front lawn with the lid open. Now, I so like to believe that story to be true because it must have busted up the new couple's weekend. You told me you'd never see her again. Now, in a moment, we're going to go inside Slater Mill where it's slightly warmer, but I'd like to share a verse I composed with you, if I have it memorized. It's called Nether River, like a netherland. 4 years ago, I was strolling along the walkway here in the early evening, and I found myself composing, which I suppose is infinitely preferable to decomposing, and I came up with this rhyme, Nether River. Looking down the Blackstone River causes me to quake and shiver when I think it might deliver those sad souls whose lives were claimed. Ceaselessly I see it flowing, with the chill wind softly blowing, and I pause here, never knowing of the lost ones left unnamed. Moonlight on the water gleaming, carried by the river streaming, spirits flown that now are dreaming of this river never tamed. So let us go inside. Ever since. It was Moses Brown who had the idea and the financial backing to build and open a cotton spinning mill on this site. And the remarkable Samuel Slater literally stole out of England, bringing with him that knowledge of the water-powered spinning machinery that a handful of American manufacturers who saw promise in textile manufacture, making cloth and yarn, such as Moses Brown, were trying unsuccessfully to replicate. Now, Moses Brown, midlife after the death of his wife, had converted to Quakerism. So as a Quaker by creed and by faith, Moses Brown was an early and an active abolitionist. Key word there is abolish, do away with. Moses Brown did not agree with the slave trade. So Moses Brown was known to boast in letters to his brothers, "In our mill we do not use slaves to work. We use children." That was a lot better. That was a pretty fair Moses Brown impression, by the way. And in many of these mills, including Slater Mill, children as young as 6, 7 years of age could come and work full 12-hour shifts. They would receive a half an hour break once per day for lunch and bathroom needs, but that was originally timed half-hour break. And worker housing was built in the vicinity of the mills so that everyone could hear the factory bell and report to work. So, welcome to 1793. Who this stern-looking self-made man is, whose initials are SS? That's Mr. Slater, overseeing the mill. This is where he walked. This is where his living footsteps fell. So come through this way. I think we're going to make our way into the open area of the mill. Also, we might imprint your image into our photographs. Come into our circle, please. We believe you're still here with us. We come here as your friends. We don't want to disturb you or frighten you. We only wish to learn about you. I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'm going to pause between those questions. At least one of us has an audio recording. Keith is recording. Are you someone that worked here in Slater Mill? Did you work here with the children? Did you work for Mr. Samuel Slater? And already I'm feeling, I don't know if this is just my experience, but I feel like pressure. Something seems to have changed in the air. I'm feeling a tingling here. Electric sensation. Are you here with us already? This is your place of work. It's where you remain. We are your guest here. All right, I don't know if it's just me at this point, but I'm feeling something very definite. It usually takes about 10 minutes, but I'm feeling this already. I feel like this, like an electric charge, and tingling here. And you might want to take some pictures, those of you who have cameras. Are you here with us now? It seems you might be. Whoa. It almost stings. Anybody feel it here that it's cold? Yeah. I'm just surprised it's happening this fast. Things used to us.
Also, anyone taking flash pictures, we ask that you call out flash first.
That way the person standing next to you isn't seeing a hovering green orb for the next 10 minutes. But it's also polite to the spirits. Sometimes they object to that. They're known to say no in the recording. Temperature's going down to 66, dropping down. Ooh, let's see when it starts. Yep. Feel it. Right about here. Right about here, feel it. I think this is our little friend. Say hello to my little friend. Oh, you, whoa! I mean, this is palpable. This is stronger than I felt it before. I think this kind of manifestation is increasing because our tour guide, Robin, she was here just a couple of days ago. And it was a daytime tour. People were feeling a cold spot, and it was like they were touching it. Wow. Even, you know, it should be warming up here, but it's actually, the temperature's dropping.
Flash.
Yep, something's here. I could use a volunteer, preferably a woman. We've made eye contact. Well, different persons could try it too. Would you like to hug what we think might be a child? You don't have to. What's your name, please? Kristen. I thought it was Kristen. Yeah. Could you just pretend you're hugging a child? It just seems to respond to women more, nothing personal, guys.
I see that ring.
There you go, Kristen. I'll tell you what. We're going to go over to the next building. We're going to leave Kristen here. We're going to come back in a half an hour and ask you what you felt. Stay here by yourself. No, I'm just kidding. All right, thank you, Kristen. Would somebody else like to try? Young lady, would you like to try? Or somebody would like to come forward? Okay. All right, Christina's going to do it. You felt spirits before, so. Okay. And of course, ghost hunting is fun, or I wouldn't stick with it. But like Bruce Lee said, play seriously. Could you touch somebody, please, so that we can feel you? And these windows are quite sealed. You won't feel any drafts coming out of them. Now it actually feels warm now. Behind you? Like it's traveled?
Me too.
What's happening over here? Do you have
we said we felt a drag. Right before they said that they felt cold, like we felt it like on our, like yeah, it's like
it's traveling then. It's traveling around. It doesn't want to stay still tonight. I'm just guessing it's a little. Well, I could try a more radical experiment. I could activate the noisiest and most dangerous machine in our collection. It's a spinning mule that was built in 1909. And early in the machine's evolution, when the thread snapped, and threads always would, that can spin 64 lines of thread at the same time. Somebody would need to get back there behind the carriage, tie a little weaver's knot to keep the thread traveling. Then they had to duck underneath the carriage, hit the floor, get out of the way of the carriage before it rolled back and crushed them. I wouldn't have to go back there. I'm too big and clumsy. But an 8 or 9-year-old child should have little trouble getting back there behind the carriage, tying some knots where the thread broke, and then ducking underneath it, hit the deck, and climb over the rail. So I mean,
you know, mate, I used to work in one of these things when I was a lad, and the children didn't always make it out of it.
So every once in a while we'll hear confirmation of the rigors and the dangers of working in these noisy textile mills. Now if I leave this lever back, we're going all night. To get out, don't they? You gotta crawl out of there now before. I'm sure little Bobby and Sarah made it out in time, most of the time. All right, let's just take advantage of our space and walk around a little bit, see if we hear or feel anything, because this is genuine paranormal investigative procedure.
All the pictures you showed
Film
me.
it.
Wait, let me see that one. Wait, there's nothing in this one. That one, and then...
See, but the other photographs are normal.
I want to see.
And they're showing up again in the second photograph.
It's fog. That's what you're seeing. Wait.
But it's inside the mill.
That's not fog supposed to be, Carl.
That's a spirit mist. I don't know what else to call it, but sometimes you find a concentration of energy that we can call a spirit mist. It happens primarily in cemeteries and very haunted sites. But the photograph before, the preceding photograph and the photograph after will be completely normal looking. The whole thing?
Yes.
Well, Lana Brock, it was October 17th, 2014. Lana Brock was here from Kokomo, Indiana. Now, Lana's story was featured on an episode of the Sci-Fi Channel series Paranormal Witness. It tells about her and her twin sister growing up in a very haunted house in Kokomo, Indiana. It's one of the top 3 most popular episodes of Paranormal Witness. Well, Lana's EMF detector, her electromagnetic field detector, started reacting loudly when she entered the mill. She aimed her camera at the stairwell, and in one of her pictures you can see a figure. You can see the arm and the leg running up the stairwell. It looks like somebody running up the stairs. No, her twin sister's still with us, Lisa, Lana and Lisa. But it's fun to see that episode here saying, Lana, Lisa. No, her twin sister's still with you.
Are you here with us? She doesn't like the light. Follow the bowl. Where's the bowl going? Look at them turning.
Are you upset there are women in this building?
Anybody sensing anything in this area? Feel the elements.
Well, no, over in the corner, that far side door. I know this is the door that leads into the mill. The door with the ramp. When you're standing right there near the wall, it feels a lot colder. It just felt a little cooler than normal. And then when I walked away, towards the door that leads into all the parts of the mill. It felt a little bit warmer, a little bit like more at peace. When I went back over to the railing, leaned up against that, it started to feel a little bit colder again. So I don't know what was going on. So it was a little strange.
And you heard some sounds as well?
Yes, behind the door, that door that leads to the other part of the mill. I was leaning up on it most of the time because I thought I heard shuffling, and I didn't know if anybody was behind it. That's why I asked what was behind it, and it was just a little weird, just a little shuffling noises that were going on behind that door. So it was pretty cool though.
When we first went in, I was only a minute or two in. We could hear like couldn't see anything, but you could hear this like chatter, and it sounded like the rustling of plates. And I asked the tour gentleman if they ate in the building, if they and he said that they did, but he wasn't sure where. But it definitely had the sound of plates and like somebody was having a meal or cleaning up. It just sounded like a lot of noise.
What was the most paranormal thing that you saw happen tonight? You heard voices in the midnight, I tell you.
This is Carl Johnson for Nebula Entertainment, and I'm here in Slater Mill site, built in 1793, Slater Mill building proper, and we've just had a public ghost tour. Now, the reason I organized this program is to provide persons with a venue for paranormal investigating if they're not a member of a group, or, well, Slater Mill is regarded as a mecca for paranormal investigators by many. People come from all diverse areas of the country to be here. And this provides people with an opportunity to come into this mill and spend 90 minutes, well, it always turns into 2 hours, investigating, exploring. We go through all 3 buildings on the grounds with the lights off. And it is authentic paranormal investigation procedure. I'll always start off with a proviso that we can't guarantee that persons will experience anything of a paranormal nature, but they will hear some of the lesser known history and lore of Slater Mill and the Blackstone River, which you don't read about in the history books, but nonetheless we have confirmed and researched. But we always get something that you could call paranormal or inexplicable always occurs. So that's why we're here in the 1793 Slater Mill.
When the Perron family moved into the old Arnold estate on Rhode Island in the December of 1970, they were given just one piece of advice by the previous occupants. For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. The haunting began almost immediately. At first, the spirits were largely friendly towards the Perrons. The children, the 5 sisters Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, were the main focus of the friendly apparitions' attentions. They would, in fact, grow very fond of 2 of the spirits. One of these entities was claimed to be the benevolent ghost of Mrs. Arnold, who was reported to have tucked the girls in at night and would kiss them on the forehead. The other was Johnny Arnold, the boy who was said to have hung himself in the attic of the secluded farmhouse in the mid-18th century. So fond of the boy spirit were the girls that they lovingly nicknamed him Manny. He was said to have played with their toys and watched the sisters as they played outside. The family in general especially welcomed the so-called sweeping ghost. This spirit's presence would only ever be heard from a distance, the sound of a broom shuffling against the floor. Whenever the family would go in and investigate, they would find a broom leaning against a wall with a neat pile of dirt next to it. However, as time went by, it became apparent that not all the spirits on the estate were friendly. Most mornings at 5:15, spirits who smelled of rotting flesh would visit the sleeping family to lift up their beds, tossing aside whomever was in them. The Perrons also claimed to have encountered demonic forces at the farmhouse, who would pull on the girls' hair and limbs during the night. Banging doors and disembodied cries were also a regular occurrence. One night, the family supposedly heard a voice that told them of 7 dead soldiers buried within the walls of their home. However horrible these occurrences were, there was one entity which made the rest pale in comparison. The events were supposedly so terrible that Andrea Perron, now a grown woman, still refuses to talk in detail about it. Her only comment about the malevolent entity was this: "Let's just say there was a very bad male spirit in the home, with 5 little girls." Aside from these spirits, there was one which is now infamous, brought into the popular sphere by the horror film The Conjuring. Her name was Bathsheba. Much of Andrea Perron's adult autobiographical account is dedicated to this spirit. Bathsheba Thayer was born on Rhode Island in 1812. In her early 30s, she married Judson Sherman and gave birth to at least one known son, Herman. Bathsheba and Judson are believed to have had 3 other children, with all dying at a very young age. From what can be gathered from public records, Bathsheba and Judson Sherman lived out their days at the old Arnold estate, both dying in the 1880s. Their son, Herbert Sherman, outlived them, dying in 1903. During Bathsheba's lifetime, there was one incident which marked the familial home out as a place of darkness. It involved the death of an infant and the accusation of murder caused by an incision at the back of the head. The infant had been in the care of Bathsheba at the time, and her neighbors were quick to accuse her of being a witch. Sadly, such an accusation was all too common a fate for any woman who was in any way associated with tragedy and had attracted jealousy. After all, Bathsheba had much to make her neighbors envious. She was beautiful and had a husband who provided well for her and her young boy on a private estate. It would not matter that the justice courts found Bathsheba not guilty. The corpse of the infant would follow her for the rest of her life. Her neighbors continued to believe that she had killed the child. Many speculated that the infant had been sacrificed to the devil to bestow Bathsheba with eternal youth and beauty. Some rumors were all the more malicious, claiming that she had sacrificed her own children as well. From there, rumors spread like wildfire. The local community whispered that Bathsheba Sherman was a sadist who enjoyed torturing her staff, much like Madame LaLaurie of New Orleans in the early 19th century. When Bathsheba died, her body was said to have turned to stone. That was part of Satan's price for having granted her beauty. Andrea Perron, when writing in her later autobiographical account, has suggested that the infamy of the accusation levied against Bathsheba pained her throughout her life. Thus, by the time Bathsheba died, all that remained of her once beautiful and youthful self was a woman filled with bitterness and rage. A woman who had been tormented by the cruelty of her fellow man. In the afterlife, Bathsheba continued to nurture this hatred, howling angry cries in the night and tormenting all those she encountered. The Perrons claimed that Bathsheba would disturb the children by moving their toys around and making their things disappear. The spirit of Bathsheba, however, had a particular hatred of Carolyn, Andrea's mother. It was said that Bathsheba was infatuated with Roger, Carolyn's husband, and as such wanted Carolyn out of the way. Because of this, Roger only ever encountered Bathsheba's sweeter side, with nothing but light-fingered caresses and sensual advances from the spirit. For Carolyn, not only would objects in the house disappear, but she reported being physically hurt and emotionally tormented, her energy constantly consumed, almost like Bathsheba intended to possess her body. Before too long, the Perron family were exhausted and desperately in need of help. And so they reached out to the paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, said she immediately sensed a dark spirit living in the house, Bathsheba. She pointed to a small circular incision at the back of Carolyn's leg, identifying it as Bathsheba's handiwork. Lorraine stated that the wound possessed the same characteristics as the one found drilled into the infant's skull, and that Bathsheba had indeed been guilty of the horrific crime. As such, Bathsheba was posthumously denounced as a witch. The Warrens declared the house to be diabolically infested, with all its inhabitants in danger of falling under Bathsheba's power. However, they stated that an exorcism was not possible because the Perrons were not religious. They did, however, attempt a séance with Carolyn in the cellar of the house. It backfired. Instead of cleansing the house, Carolyn was possessed by Bathsheba and thrown 20 feet backwards. After that, there would be no stopping Bathsheba or the spirits that had taken over the house. Ed and Lorraine Warren were forced to retreat. Even to this day, Lorraine is still traumatized by the old Arnold estate. In her own words, "The things that went on there were just so incredibly frightening. It still affects me to talk about it today." For years after the Warrens' visit, the Perrons continued to live alongside the dark entities of the house. Years later, they would leave the house and Norma Sutcliffe would move in. After the release of the Conjuring movie in 2013, fans of the film began trespassing on the property. This prompted Norma to make a response to the movie's claims. According to her account, she researched town hall records and talked to other people who had lived in the house. She found out that all the supposed suicides and murders linked to the secluded farmhouse did not happen there, but rather at other locations around town. The story of young Johnny Arnold hanging himself in the attic of the house. The case of an 11-year-old girl, Prudence Arnold, being assaulted and murdered by unknown hands on the property. The elder lady, Mrs. Arnold, killing herself in the barn. All most likely happened elsewhere. Even the trial of Bathsheba Sherman was found to be dubious, with there being no historical record of it taking place. Her grave, however, is known to be at a nearby Baptist cemetery. It is recorded that at her funeral, the Baptist minister honored her with a eulogy, something which probably would not have happened if Bathsheba had truly been suspected of infanticide. After living in the house for many years, Norma states that she has never seen a ghost or spirit. It is, however, interesting that in 2005, the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters were invited to investigate the house. The team reported finding several cold spots and recorded a door opening of its own accord in the house. All of this surprised Norma at the time. Whilst the history of the house may have been muddled, either intentionally or otherwise across the decades, it is possible that the house is haunted. Indeed, Andrea Perron and her family continue to confirm that the haunting really did occur. What is more, it is a possibility that the haunting was not directly connected to the house, but rather to the family themselves. After all, in cases of hauntings, children are often the focus of spiritual activity, such as with the young Daniel Lutz in the case of Amityville. Carolyn and Roger Perron had 5 daughters. Sadly, there is, however, little evidence for the Perron family's haunting beyond their collective testimonies. If there were evil entities at the house, It is unlikely that Bathsheba Sherman was one of them, as records show no evidence of any of the accusations levied against her. However, evil spirits or even demonic forces have never needed a name. If they exist, they would probably have no scruples as to how we identify and categorize them. Evil entities, much like evil people, would simply change names and faces to suit their aim of deception. Thus, much like the nameless serial killers who grow to old age and die quietly, the truth of what happened to the Perrons shall always be elusive. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give this a thumbs up to let me know. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not check out the ones on screen now? Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.
All right, this is Max Legault with Shallow Graves Magazine. Here are some special guests. Take a look.
It's us. We're here.
Conjuring, Sandra Johnson. Maybe you've heard of them. They were just telling us some of those stories. So I hear you've known each other for just a little while.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
How long might that be? You don't have to admit to the...
No, we'll admit it.
You can say how young
45
you were.
years.
4 or 5 years?
We
Oh,
survived to get
that's
this
amazing.
old.
You lasted that long.
This is my paranormal brother. He showed up at our farmhouse when he was 18 years old and already a seasoned paranormal investigator.
Whoa.
We don't know how he knew to come. He said my mother called him. She said, I never called anyone, but she liked him so much that she invited him into the house. And I'm telling you, look at him now, and then imagine him with long, flowing, beautiful blonde hair. He pulls up in the yard with his group Pyro, which is short for
Parapsychological Investigation and Research Organization.
Awesome.
They pull into the yard of the farmhouse. It's August of 1973. We've already lived there for 3 years, almost. And he said, well, he pulled in, he got out of the car, and he's holding a Bible, which was real smart for him to bring that to the farm. And my sister Nancy, who was in love with anything male, automatically, if it was male, it was love. She's gonna, if she ever sees this, she'll so kill me. But anyway, she goes running into the house, and he's wearing a tunic and the long hair and she's like, Mom, Jesus Christ is here. He looked the part. Like,
probably
you
didn't
can't
have the
believe
beard though.
No, I had the sideburns.
Yeah,
though.
the sideburns, yes. Yeah. And so they were actually the first ones to investigate the house, and to this day we don't understand.
Wait, so they
how
were
that
investigating
happened.
your house?
Yes, yep, the farmhouse, and we don't understand how it happened, but we both know that it was supposed to. And then after his experience, several that day, he went and got Ed and Lorraine Warren and brought them to our house. We didn't know who they were when they showed up at the door, but he did. And he went and informed them that there was a family in Harrisville, Rhode Island that had a predicament. And they came on night before Halloween, 1973, because they thought that would be when the veil was thinnest and they had a best chance of having a manifestation. And they later understood that you could come to our house any time of day or night, any day of the week, any time of year, and boom.
Like, don't worry about the time, just show up.
Yes, exactly. At least in terms of the farmhouse, there was no veil. Yep, no veil at all.
The house itself was a portal.
Yep, cleverly disguised as a farmhouse.
Yes. Do you still have this house?
No, we sold it in 1980, and our whole family moved south. I went back to Rhode Island years later, but the thing that's most interesting about this is that I consider Keith a very holy person. He's very devout, and he was threatening to the house. There was some entity in the house that did not want him there, and I want you to tell the story about the bedroom.
Oh, right. Well,
we might be going into some X-rated material again.
No, actually, it's Jay.
Her sisters took me by the hand and took me up, showed me where they were most frightened. This bedroom where two of them shared, and they had had some very, very frightening experiences in that bedroom. Yep. Yes, Nancy and April had some frightening experiences there, and I felt so bad for them because they were so frightened. They were such beautiful young children. And even though I was a teenager, I was the closest thing to an adult. So I asked them, do you have any religious beliefs? And they said, oh yes, we're Catholic. And I said, well, try calling upon the name of Jesus. And as soon as I said that name, yes, suddenly there was, it's hard to describe. Her sister has described it as the bubble. It's like you're contained, time seems to stop. It's like an electrical charge. The atmosphere just changed. Within that second, there was a window to my right that could not possibly be closed because of the humidity, the atmosphere. It suddenly slammed so hard it practically shook the room. Her sister was slapped on the left side of the head, went screaming away, and just all pandemonium in just a few seconds. But it seemed like time had slowed down. So I said the name of Jesus twice more, told them not to be afraid. It left the room. Not the house, but whatever was there left the room. And we all shared a group hug, and then we hightailed it downstairs. I did put some symbols.
Yes,
now, I didn't have any holy water or blessed oil with me at the time.
But
so
we had sidewalk chalk.
Sidewalk chalk.
Hey!
We were kids, we had sidewalk chalk.
In the sign of the cross over the door and the windows. And then we went downstairs, didn't come back for the rest of the night until they had to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very intense environment to grow up in, but it was also equally enlightening because when we were in crisis in that house, all that was required to make it stop was invoking the name of God and saying it with heartfelt desire. God help me, be with me. And it stopped. Whatever it was, it stopped. And, you know, one of the things that The Conjuring did was leave people with the impression that the Warrens were, you know, holy and devout Roman Catholics, which they were.
Right.
But it tried to juxtapose them to the Perron pagan heathens as though we had no spirituality. And anybody that really works in the paranormal and does, you know, conducts investigations knows that it's very spiritual people that are targeted. And what happened when we moved into that house was that there was a female entity there who was threatened by my mother. She wanted us, the 5 children, she coveted us, and she lusted after my father, and she wanted my mother gone. And when she couldn't get my mother to leave of her own avail, she started to oppress her from within. And remember, my mom went through that period of time where she started using archaic language and dressing in dark vintage clothing. And we're like, you know, we thought at first, because she was doing so much historical research on the house, that maybe she was just a little overexposed to that. But we didn't realize that she was slipping away from us.
She started melding into another person altogether, an older person, very, very archaic, was almost losing her identity. And that's a very, very dangerous place to be at.
Her voice even changed. It didn't even sound like her. And I heard years and years later, I heard a tape that they really couldn't get a lot of photographs or anything from the house. Whenever the Warrens came to conduct their investigation, which was maybe 4 or 5 times over a year and a half, and we lived there another 7 years after that. The only time they ever got her recorded was one time, and I heard John Zaffis shared it with me a few years ago. And I'm listening to this recording, and I'm like, wait a minute. You know, it says Carolyn Perron on this, and it didn't sound like my mother. And it wasn't until about 45 minutes into her interview with Ed and Lorraine that she actually came back. So the entity that was trying to take over with her was the one that was actually speaking to them for about 45 minutes. But I'll tell you what brought her back. Remember I shared this with you? We did a thing about this together.
Yes.
There was a seance in the house. It was never an exorcism. My mother was not possessed. But she was definitely involved with the spirit that was so powerful. And Ed and Lorraine came and they conducted a seance that went very tragically wrong, and my mother almost lost her life. And about 3 months later, my father threw them out of the house. He's like, don't get out, don't ever come back, we don't want to know you, get out. And he used some very colorful language. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. But about 3 months later, my mother she was just wasting away. She had
Yes.
become waif-like. I mean,
Yes.
just hollowed out cheeks, and she was really suffering, and she wasn't eating. She just was, we felt like we were losing her, and that was my real fear living in the house, was that my mother was going to die in the house. And I guess it was sometime later, it must have been in the fall, because I was up doing homework late one night, and I had taken over the role as the third parent, because my dad was on the road a lot, and Mom was just struggling so much that I came home, I made dinner for the girls, I helped them with their homework, I got them to bed, and she came out of her room about 11 o'clock that night, and she said, "I'm hungry," and I was like, well, great, you know, and I had made beef stew that night, so I went into the kitchen, and, oh, I make the best beef stew, oh my God, but I had already closed the house down for the night, and I walked from the parlor, through the darkened dining room, through the front foyer, through the kitchen, into the pantry. So I was like a football field away from her. And it took me, there was before microwave, so I had to heat up the stew, and she wanted coffee at 11 o'clock at night. And so I was gone for a few minutes. In the interim, she reached over into the wood box to throw a log on the fire. And it was so cold up there, we had a fire like 10 months out of the year. And she heard laughter behind her as she was throwing the log on the fireplace. And she turned around, and there was a whole family having dinner in our dining room, sitting at furniture that was all hand-hewn, not our own, a woman cooking at a fireplace that had been sealed for more than 100 years. There were two men sitting at the table. They had pewter steins in front of them, indicative of the 1700s, right? Because
Yes.
it was outlawed in the 1800s because it was killing people
Yes,
with
the lead content. Yes.
And the two men were sitting there. They were sitting on benches along the side of the table. The woman's cooking. She told her kids to go take their seats. They were having dinner. And one of them turned and looked into the parlor, and he saw my mother. And he nudged the man beside him and pointed her out, and she was the ghost.
She was the ghost to them.
Yep.
For a moment.
So they were looking into the future while she was simultaneously looking into the past. And that was her epiphany. That's when the light went on and she came back to us, because finally it made sense. We were living in simultaneous multiple dimensions. And she realized that we were sharing that house with a multitude of people, and that they were perfectly safe, perfectly benign, and they were just having dinner, and there was room enough for everyone. They were just living there in their time. It was a fascinating, incredible way to grow up. And even though there were truly frightening moments, it was as much a love story as it was a horror story. Don't you think? Wouldn't you describe it as that?
Yes. The ending of the movie did get it right. When the whole family's together, holding on to each other, and a loving kumbaya moment. That was actually true. That was the Perron family.
It was our love for each other that helped us survive an ordeal that most people can't really even imagine living that way. We stayed in that house for 10 years for a multitude of reasons, but I think ultimately we stayed in that house because we were supposed to. And then 30 years later, I was supposed to put pen to paper and tell our story to the world when the world was ready to hear it.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And it's not that nothing happened while she was writing the story. She was
I know, there was
contacted.
a period. Yeah, we weren't living there, and someone else had to be.
Well, you know, I thought that
Did they know what they were getting into?
Yeah, yes, they did, actually. They did. She bought that house because of its reputation. But I will tell you that we, when we moved, we thought that would be it, that it would be all over.
Yes.
And I remember when I did your show, and I think we talked about it the first time that I did your show.
Right.
And
It's finally over.
yeah, it was like, that's it. We're moving. We're leaving them all behind. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Very profound attachments were formed that have existed and persisted lifelong, and I knew it when we left the farm and we moved to Georgia. My sister Cindy had gone down early to bring the horses. And she's standing in front of a full-length, in a modern house, in front of a full-length window with a cup of coffee in her hand, had just brewed a cup because she knew we were coming in early in the morning, and had driven all night long, so she had a fresh pot ready. And the spirit that we left behind on the porch 2 days later was standing right behind her.
I guess he missed her. And has she seen him since?
Her.
Pardon me, her.
Yes, we've all seen them since. We've all had...
So no longer just at the original location?
No. They're free to fly.
Wow, interesting. Wow, that's fascinating.
Something that's interesting, in the movie The Conjuring, she's depicted as a young teenager going through teenage angst, and she's flirting with one of the investigators. Back then,
Nancy was Nancy. It was Nancy.
oh, Andrea was a lovely
bookworm.
little bookworm with the round glasses and so sweet, but flirting, no.
No flirt. I didn't even know how until I was in my 20s.
Well, Hollywood.
I know, Holly weird. Yeah. But I will tell you, and I'll give you the scoop for your show, I just got a 3-movie deal on my trilogy of books, and the real story behind The Conjuring is coming to a theater near you in 2018.
Okay, so your trilogy of books, but 1 movie, and this one's going to be...
3 movies.
3 movies? Oh my God, it's actually going to be a trilogy of movies.
Yes, it needs to be. And even that won't cover it all, huh?
Right. There's just,
but, you know,
I mean, over 10 years of life, just can't cover it in movies, but this will come close. As close as we can.
As close as it gets, yeah.
And Sandra's listened to this story since before we were married, time after time after
time. She knew what she was getting into.
She did.
Oh, yes.
And I've actually been able to visit the house as well.
Oh, great.
And investigate it.
Our group, New England Anomalies Research actually got to visit the house, and, you know, we did actually pick up some spirit voices, so there is definitely something still there, even to this day.
Regardless of what you might hear to the contrary.
Well, thank you so much. This is a fascinating story. So looking forward to seeing the trilogy when it's released.
It will blow your mind.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear of the bonds that have been formed between you and everyone who seems to be.
Permanent
bonds. That seems to not be going away anytime soon.
Never, ever. It's permanent. It is ethereal in nature. This was supposed to happen. And the first time I met Sandra, we walked into each other's arms like we were sisters from another mother that had reunited. I mean, it's just, and that happens a lot in the paranormal community. I think that we're all doing this good work in tandem. You know, we're kind of a collective. And even though we're very different personalities, I mean, when you think about all the personalities in the paranormal, but we're all in the same boat, we're working with common purpose because we know what we want the rest of the world to know, that there is something beyond our mortal existence, and how you comport yourself in this life matters. And that's the message.
Well, all right. And the message I hope everybody here will take away from it, as well as we can all use that type of friendships in our own lives going forward. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. This couldn't have gone much better. Yahoo! This is Max Legault, Shallow Grays Magazine, signing off. Thank you so much. See you again tomorrow.
Here. So her body could have been totally frozen. It had just defrosted, so to speak. And that's why she may have appeared so lifelike. Why she was turned over, we really don't know. Perhaps her body was jostled when they took the coffin out. But whatever the reason, the men, and there were 12 men here, friends and farmhands, parishioners, they were convinced they had found their undead. The undead was here. They were looking at the undead. Next step is to disrupt the body. Now, Dr. Metcalf did examine Mercy Lena's body. He said that there is nothing, to him there was nothing unusual about her state of preservation. It was totally natural since she'd been buried in the 2 coldest months of the year. He did perform the autopsy here. Now, the autopsy at the time, post-mortem today, of course, is a Y-shaped, starts at the shoulders, the chest area, goes down to the midsection. During the 19th century, it was the opposite. It was an upside-down Y, so it would begin at the midsection and then go up. Now, you think of the indignity of doing this to her body, and these were 12 men. They were fellow parishioners who would have known Mercy Brown from church during life. And it's fortunate that Mercy knew nothing of this. This was all after her death. All of it was post-mortem, and she knew nothing of the indignity her body would be subjected to. But here's this young 19-year-old woman. Her body is laid naked, and her organs are extracted from her body. Now, there was a little bit of blood in her heart and a little bit of blood in her liver. When Dr. Metcalf handled these organs, some blood did drip out. Again, these organs may have just defrosted after being frozen solid. And again, Harold Metcalf said there was nothing unusual about this. However, the people were convinced now they had their vampire, they had their undead. So, the ritual after Dr. Metcalf left was to be performed. It was on a nearby rock. Now, by tradition, there's a rock over here. It is said that this is where Mercy Lena's heart and liver were burned. We don't know for sure. It could have been over by the stone wall, but by tradition, it's this rock simply because it's nearby her grave. So her heart and liver were apparently burned, reduced to ashes. They saved the ashes, mixed the ashes with herbs, and gave it like a concoction for her brother Edwin, who was very, very sick, gave it to him to drink. Now, I know that sounds very bizarre, barbaric by today's standards, but they had the right idea when you think of it. Inoculation. They were trying to give him a bit of the disease, the curse, whatever they called it, and trying to immunize him from the same fate that his mother and his sisters had endured. And hopefully that would cure him. Unfortunately, it did not. He died less than 2 months later on May 2nd, 1892. But since there were no more immediate deaths in the family, they figured they'd done the right thing. Mercy was laid to rest in a burial spot, and supposedly that was the end of the story. Now, Mercy had 2 younger sisters, Myra and Hattie, and it was years later that, of course, one of them, Myra, died at a very young age. She's not buried here, but she died at a young age. She had just been married. She was only 18 years old, and she was laid to rest in another county. Hattie took care of her father. Now, shortly after these deaths, George Brown sold his horse farm and went to live with his daughter Hattie. And Hattie lived to quite a ripe age. She died in 1954. George Brown, now the town records say that around the turn of the century, George Brown had gone to live with her family. So, but he is buried here. He died, lived to be 80 years old. He lived to a ripe old age, and buried here in the Exeter Cemetery. That's the basic story. Now, since then, there have been numerous reports of paranormal activity happening in this cemetery. Some, I believe, some can be substantiated, some are just legends, but there was a relative at the time, about the 1920s, who came with the old Model T in here, and he saw this bright, he had to squint at it in the nighttime, this orb, this glowing orb right by the graves here. And he and his, I believe it was his cousin, they hightailed it out of here. And so that's his testimony. around the cemetery grounds, prowling around. I don't know how much that could be substantiated. I do know that a friend of mine, former co-worker, her daughters came here at night, and one of the daughters was driving. Suddenly her car locks, or the doors just locked automatically, and she couldn't get out. She started to panic. She never came here again. That was enough to frighten her. But every once in a while things do happen. It's been reported that when there is a feeling of oppression, that you say the Lord's Prayer and it lifts. I've actually experienced that. I was with that same co-worker. She started to feel very, very oppressed. My wife Sandra was with us. She thought that Sandra had tapped her on the shoulder. She looked around, my wife's over there. She was several feet away from her, so we couldn't have met her. She got very scared, but I did say the Lord's Prayer in front of Mercy's grave. There was a feeling of peace. So that does seem to be substantiated somewhat. I don't think personally that it is Mercy Brown. I think it is negative energy. Like so many of these cemeteries that have legends around them, cults have come in, people have tried to call up spirits. So even though this is consecrated ground, it's holy ground, some people do bring in negative energy, and I think that's what affects places like this, why you do get some legitimate paranormal activity.
I gotta tell you, you know, before I think the very last time, Mercy wouldn't communicate with anyone else but me. And I was the only one she would communicate with. And I would ask her a question, the K2 meter would light up. When another guy used it, the K2 meter, nothing happened. He says, why is it she only talks to you? I says, I don't know. Maybe it's because, you know, my aura, you know, who I am, and I seem to relate to her a little bit.
Maybe you're a non-threatening personality,
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Because she has no problem speaking to me. No problem. I bet you if I walked away right now with my K2 meter, I'll get a response.
Really?
Yeah. Same thing over there.
Now, I have known about Mercy Brown and the stories for so long. What I like to do, it's kind of a thing that I like to do when I get intensely interested by somebody who lived before. I try to recreate them. Yeah, in my mind, I try to recreate them. I have an image of her in my mind. Doesn't mean that's what she looked like.
Yeah.
But there's not much to go on what she actually looked like and what she was like as a person, because she was a real person.
Yeah.
Obviously. And again, it's fortunate that in her lifetime she knew nothing of this.
Yeah.
She knew nothing of that this folklore superstition was going to be utilized here. And in fact, it did get printed in the local Gazette.
Yeah.
And then, as you know, it got leaked to the Providence Journal, and pirate superstition tested in Exeter. And people were appalled at this late date of 1892. They were here, obviously, digging up, looking for vampires for the
time during the Gordon murders.
Yes, yeah, the same year, 1892. Gordon murders took place August 4th, 1892. Of course, this was in March 1892, the same year. Interesting time to live in New England.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Yes, but even though it was almost on the cusp of the 20th century, this was very, very rural. People were still very much living in the 19th century here. They were simple farm folk, hard living, but life could be harsh at times. There was no cure for these childhood diseases. Of course, George and Mary Eliza had 5 children. Sometimes families were much more numerous. They would have multiple children simply because of the child mortality rate. They didn't have inoculations that we do, unfortunately. But
you get a feeling somebody's sitting next to me. Yeah.
Really?
Weird. I get that. I get that when I go to cemeteries. I feel things around me.
Yes.
You know, even though I can't see them, I feel them.
I only tend to get that feeling when we're talking about the deceased, starting to discuss them.
Oh, even if I wasn't talking about it, I mean, when I first came here, it was like blank, nothing. And then after being here for a few minutes, after a few minutes, I started feeling something. I can't place what it was.
Well, maybe you're a magnet.
I think I am. I think I am. Because,
some people.
They always seem to be attracted to me. I don't know why. I guess I am a paranormal magnet.
Maybe that's something what brought you into the paranormal investigation field in the first place.
All my life I've been dealing with that stuff. I mean, you know, houses I lived in, being out in the woods, seeing a white figure walk through the woods and there's nobody there. And my mother used to say, "Oh, your imagination's running away from you again." So I accepted that, but it still kept happening. So,
yes. Now, some facts about her. Unfortunately, very little is said of her lifetime from contemporary reports. There's folklore, there's legends that she was wandering around cemeteries during her lifetime. That's all folklore. That's not history. But it's understandable these things. People do create folklore. We know that she
came back home again.
Yes, yeah. New England weather. Yeah. We know that she did have some kind of popularity because her obituary mentions that she had friends. And she did not go by the name Mercy, as you know,
No,
in
she
her
went
lifetime.
by her middle name.
Her middle name, Lena, exactly. I think even in the late 1800s, for a young farm girl, maybe the name Mercy was a little outdated.
Yeah.
Prior to her illness, she was probably very, very physically fit young woman. Used to hard work on the farm. Since her mother had passed, she had to take care of her two younger sisters, of course, too. And there was a photograph no longer in existence of her brother Edwin. He was described as a strapping young fellow, very robust. So we assume she may have been robust prior to her illness, used to hard work and tending horses. And since her obituary says, known to Lena as by her friends, well, that says that she did enjoy some popularity. And who knows, you can try to fill in the blanks. She may have once or twice gone to Rocky Point Amusement Park and the Shore Dinner Hall at the time. That was open at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what young people did in the area.
For years, up until they closed in what, mid-80s?
Yeah, early 1990s when it was completely closed. Because now it's a nice
Shall we get on our gear and...
Sure, we will. But about her physical appearance, there are no contemporary illustrations or photographs of her, unfortunately.
Would you like to use this one?
Thank you very much.
It's very sensitive, by the way.
Yeah.
We use it at the Liz Gordon house.
Mm-hmm.
Picked up all kinds of stuff.
Oh, good. I think she may have been about...
Get her close.
Is that?
Make sure you get us... Okay, what me and Keith is going to do, we're going to try to communicate. Mercy usually has no problem communicating with me whatsoever. We develop some kind of friendship. She hasn't seen me in a couple of years. But Mercy, I'm here. I'm back. It's me, Gary, and wow. Did I just pick up something?
Well, I was just actually testing it.
Oh.
I was testing it.
And me and my friend Keith would like to speak to you, if it's okay. I'm sure you have no problem with that. Okay, I'm going to try to speak to you through the ghost. This is called a spirit box, Mercy. And you can talk to me through this contraction. Mercy, are you here?
I've established my baseline, no readings at this point.
No, I haven't got anything.
It's interesting to note that traditionally all sorts of stuffed animals, trinkets for her, coins on the headstone.
Yeah, I used to put my card there actually.
Oh, good. I guess you got calling card.
In case you need to call you.
And even jewelry.
I'd like to speak to Mercy Brown. Mercy Lena Brown, are you there? Mercy? Can you speak to me? Who's here with us right now? make the light up. Miss Gracie.
Now, since Miss Brown went by her middle name, I wonder if you get any different results if you...
Yeah, want me to try that?
Yes.
Lena, this is your friend Gary. I came to visit you. I know it's been a while, but I'd like to know if you'd like to speak to me and if you have anything you'd like to say. You let me know you're here. You make the light up. Say something to the box. Wait. You heard that, right? Said wait. See Lena Brown, are you here? Get your mail. You get in the mail, of course. What I want, I'd like to speak to Mercy Lena Brown. I'm gonna go by a tube, Lena, and we're gonna try to speak to you over there because usually that's the best place you communicate is by the tube. Okay, I'll be back in a little bit, okay? Give me a couple of minutes.
Somebody tore it right out. Look at that.
This is act of vandalism. This shouldn't be happening. This is wrong. This is disrespect.
Well, the gate's usually closed.
Yeah. Got you close it.
This is what makes it more difficult, Gary, for investigators like us.
Yeah.
We're interested in historic detail and want to see what energy might be here. This is what introduces negative energy to the cemeteries. So it is senseless act of vandalism. Now, of course, there's a legend that if you knock on the door, someone's going to knock back. And teenagers try that and everything, but now it's sealed up, so that can't be. But somebody was desperate enough to do that.
Maybe they wanted to break in it.
Yes. Found that their efforts were thwarted.
What about Mercy has to say?
The tomb used to be open and they closed it with the cinder blocks?
Yes, yes, it used to be open because people kept prying the door open.
Try to get some. Today is June
3rd.
23rd, 2017. I'm at the Mercy Brown location in Exeter, Rhode Island. Cemetery. Keith Johnson, sitting behind, actually sitting right in front of the tomb. All seems to be pried open. And what I like to do now is see Mercy, Lena. This is Gary. I quiet too now. Would you like to say something? Can you speak into this little contraction I'm holding in my hand? How do you feel about us being here? Do you remember me? You make this light up? Tell me your name. Establish my base. There's no reaction on the hospital's Did so. Okay, I'm gonna shut this off and put this radio on, okay? So you can talk to me through this. Thank you. I think this is no longer cameras. Okay, we're gonna play this back, see if we've gotten anything. Come closer, please. We're gonna play this back and see if we've gotten anything. Turn it on. Sound like Ed, don't I? Yeah, you do. Something moving around.
Is that the wind or is it actually shuffling?
Sound like shuffling. No, I hear the wind. Birds.
What was that? I heard some noise right there.
Huh?
I heard some noise right there.
You did too?
Yeah. Yes, but after the birds.
Huh. That sure was something to think about.
Yeah, there was some sound in between that.
Yeah.
No, like a lost sound.
Yeah. We're gonna try this now over here. This box, spirit box. Yeah, hopefully we'll get something here. For some reason, she doesn't want to. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. For some reason, she doesn't want to speak to me. Sorry, I drove that. Heard that? Screaming. Who's here? Who am I speaking to? Is this Selena? Say that again? Is Mercy Lena Brown? How do you feel about your door being vandalized? Are you upset about that? Something like hello? You say hello? Say my name. What's my name? Do you know Keith? You say hello to Keith? Say hello to Keith. You heard it, right? That was neat. Yeah. Clear as day. Anything else you'd like to say? How do you feel about us being here? Is it okay we're here? You want us to leave or stay? Hey, you guys. I heard that. But what I really want to do is I want to speak to Mercy Lena Brown. Is she there? Who is this? Who am I speaking to? My name. What's your name?
Gary, heads up, I got 5 minutes left. Film.
Okay then, guess what? We're gonna go now. Pleasure talking to you. Have a good day. God bless. Well, we did get a reaction, just the wrong guy.
That's the wrong guy.
We had to speak to Mercy and we ended up getting some guy. They didn't even give us his name, I don't think.
It's like we had an open line.
Yeah.
Like the old switchboards.
Yep. Hey, well, thank you for coming along for the ride with us. And this is part of our documentary, and I'm sure there'll be other stuff involved in this series as well. And this portion, this is the first half of our documentary, which will be filmed as we speak. It will, by the time you watch this, it should be already on YouTube on my show Ghost Chasers. But this is also going to be part of our documentary as well. Thank you for coming along for the ride. And Keith, would you like to say anything?
Well, thank you for watching. Interesting history in this cemetery. Things are still going on, obviously. Unfortunately, vandalism still occurs. Mercy's headstone, that's why it's bolted in, so it can't be stolen again like it was in the early 1990s. But thank you for joining us. Gary, thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure, and I'll see you at the Paragon, and I'll talk to you soon. How's that?
See you at the Ocean State Paragon.
That's right. That's June 15th and 16th, so don't forget to be there,
Yep,
guys.
see you in July.
Visit Keith, visit me, visit everybody. We've got a lot of good people coming there this year. So, talk to you soon.